Chapter 676. Let's catch some fish. Looking at Zhang Hai's puzzled eyes, Perwalton smiled and patted Zhang Hai's shoulder. Then she stood up and began to instruct Edward Anderson and the others to catch fish. But it was different from yesterday. At that time, they were catching fish in schools. But now, they were catching fish for inspection. Therefore, they didn't encounter any schools of fish and had already thrown the net into the sea. While running, they collected all kinds of fish. About an hour later, Edward Anderson saw that the pressure in the net was almost enough, so he used the turbine to pull the net up. As the net came ashore, countless fish appeared in front of everyone. Yesterday they caught fish for sale, so there weren't many kinds of fish. Basically, they were caught according to schools of fish. All in all, there were only about 10 types of fish. But today was different. As the net of fish was pulled up, Zhang Hai couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" Because there were so many fish, not in terms of quality, but in terms of quantity. The total weight of these fish was about 2 tons, but there were at least dozens of kinds of fish. There were about 20 kinds of fish from the bream family and scorpion family. These 2 kinds of fish didn't have a large population, but there were many kinds of fish. When Zhang Hai was diving, he often found these kinds of fish. These kinds of fish often formed a school of 3 or 5. Just in Zhang Hai's fish farm, there might be no less than 50 kinds of fish. For example, the bream family, such as green bream, silver bream, white-eye bream, Irish bream, softmouth bream, and so on. The scorpion family was the same. There were 50 kinds of fish in the scorpion family. Although Zhang Hai didn't have all of them, it wasn't too far off. These fishes usually wandered around. This time, Zhang Hai scooped up all the fishes. In addition to these 2 families of fish, there were other kinds of fish, such as redfish, grouper, salmon, barracuda, mackerel, and so on. There were also a lot of these fish in Zhang Hai's fishing grounds. There were also a lot of cod and haddock that were caught. In addition to fish, there were also many squid, small octopus, and herring that leaked out through the mesh. However, what surprised Zhang Hai was the presence of some small eels. These eels were something that Zhang Hai had seen before when he was diving. However, he really hadn't noticed it before. Now that he mentioned it, Zhang Hai also noticed these fish. This is a 7-gilled eel? Looking at the eel in front of them, the others didn't have any reaction. Perwalton screamed first, and then her eyes began to shine. Hearing her scream, Tommy Charles and the others also came over. Well, it is indeed an 8-eyed eel. Our production of this thing is not too high here. I didn't expect there to be a lot. Pulling out the eel from the mesh, Tommy Charles said with some surprise. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai was even more puzzled. 7-gilled eel, also known as 8-eyed eel. You will feel disgusted when you look at its mouth, but in fact, this thing is a supreme delicacy. It is mainly eaten in Europe. Legend has it that the kings of Europe died from eating this thing, but this is a real upper-class delicacy. Feeling Zhang Hai's confusion, Edward Anderson couldn't help but explain to Zhang Hai. Is this game delicious? Looking at the long eel, Zhang Hai said with some disbelief. What's wrong with this eel? It's really hard for him to imagine that this thing is a supreme delicacy. Bull*T. This thing is not only ugly, but it also sucks blood for a living. It looks like a pig intestine with long teeth, which is really scary. When we go back in a while, I will make it for you and you will know. When Edward Anderson heard Zhang Hai's words, he couldn't help but laugh. Zhang Hai also felt that he should try it. He didn't mind eating this kind of thing. At this time, the fish net was loosened, and countless fish fell on the deck. Tommy Charles and the others began to classify the fish. Different fish had different prices, so naturally, the test results were different. Perwalton took a knife and began to grab the fish. Like an old fisherman, she first cut open the fish's belly to check if there were parasites inside, then looked at the stomach to see what was inside. Then she took photos of these cut-open fish and sent them to the experts. At the same time, she called people to come over and pick up the fish from Zhang Hai's fishing ground. After everything was done, everyone returned to the manor's dock. After returning to the manor, it was still very early. It was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Edward Anderson specially went to Zhang Hai's place to cook the fish first. In fact, it was called an eel, but it was not a fish. Because it was parasitic, it could grow to any size. This time, Zhang Hai harvested a total of 6 eels. The big one was about half a meter long, and the small one was only 20 centimeters long. Edward Anderson's method was very simple. First, he cut off the head, then roasted the big one and stewed the small one. In half an hour, these 2 dishes were ready. Zhang Hai tasted it. The taste of this thing, how should he describe it? He didn't like it very much. He had eaten yellowfin fish before, and he still had them now. This thing tasted similar to yellow trout, but it was more fishy. The meat was also very soft, and there was a unique sweetness of the seafood in Zhang Hai's place. It tasted good, if not for its appearance. While eating these things, the people called by Perwalton also arrived. They drove 2 pickup trucks and randomly loaded the fish in the 2 pickup trucks. After that they left. They would test these fish to see if they were harmful, how much nutrition they had, and whether there were parasites. Then they would set the price. Of course, the output of the fish was also one of the criteria. Now, can you tell me how I made these fish famous? Seeing the fish being taken away, Zhang Hai looked at Perwalton and asked with some doubts. He really didn't understand now. Just now he thought about it. Did Perwalton mean that he didn't care about Wall Street and forcibly raise the price? But this was impossible. Why would the people buy it? Some people would say that he was happy to sell it this way. One side was willing to hit, and the other side was willing to be hit. In the past, Zhang Hai had read a lot of farming novels in China. The protagonists in those novels all started off by planting radishes, cabbages, and so on. After they were planted, they directly ignored the market price and sold a radish for more than 100 renminbi. Then, people would go crazy and fight for it. At first, it was quite cool, but later, Zhang Hai knew that it was not possible, because this was considered a way to break the law of the market. In China, it was not allowed to sell things at a high price or a low price. This was breaking the balance of the market. It was a malicious competition. Although there was no such thing in the US, a red fish cost $10 per kilogram. How could it be sold for $30 and triple the price? If it was Zhang Hai, he wouldn't buy it. Just good quality is not enough. This is different from beef. Special quality is commercial. The difference is obvious. Zhang Hai's fish is healthier, more delicious, and more nutritious. But in the US, fish farming is not popular here, so the fish are all wild. The difference between these wild fish and Zhang Hai's fish is not particularly big. At least, Zhang Hai didn't feel that the price difference was 3 times. Naturally, no one would buy it. Everything has to be advertised. Just like your cattle. If we didn't go to the New York Beef Show, we wouldn't have seen it. And your fish is the same. You have to go to the fishing show. Looking at Zhang Hai, Perwalton said to him with a smile. She is quite confident in Zhang Hai's fish, especially after tasting it personally. From the perspective of a businessman, selling it for 3 times the price may be a loss. Zhang Hai shouldn't have raised these red fish. He should have raised more valuable fish. If he had raised fish of grouper and above, then now Zhang Hai's income would be much higher. No matter what it is, branding is very important. If your cow wins the gold medal at the National Beef Cattle Exhibition, then we will have more reasons to raise the price of your beef cattle. It's the same for your fish. If you can win the gold medal at the fish exhibition, plus the original taste of your fish, it won't be too much to sell it for $30 a kilogram. Looking at Zhang Hai, Perwalton said with a serious face, and hearing her words, Zhang Hai also thought carefully. Fishing show. To be honest, Zhang Hai understands that if there is a beef show, there must be a fishing show, but he didn't pay attention to these before. The world's largest fishing show, WFE, was established in 1973, but it is only held once every 6 years. You won't be able to catch it this time. The companies that win awards at this exhibition will receive the attention of the world. This is inevitable, but it was just completed last year. This year there will be no more. In addition, there are 3 major international fishing shows. Looking at Zhang Hai, Perwalton introduced him. The largest one is the International Fishing Exhibition in Huaxia, which is the largest fishing professional trade exhibition in Asia. It is also one of the 3 most influential fishing exhibitions in the world. It is a 5-star exhibition rated by the UA Department of Commerce, but you are a bit far away. The European Seafood Exhibition will be held in Brussels, the capital of Belgium, but I think you may have some understanding of the temperament of Europeans. Many people in Europe still live in the world where they were the world's overlords, so it is estimated that you will only be there for the show. Looking at Zhonghai, Perwalton also introduced the fishing exhibitions to Zhonghai, but unfortunately, there was nothing for Zhonghai. Sister, just tell me what I can go. After listening to so much nonsense, Zhonghai couldn't stand it, so he said to Perwalton. Hearing Zhonghai's impatient words, Perwalton couldn't help but glare at him. This guy is really troublesome. The last one, that is, the Boston Fishing Show. Looking at Zhonghai, Perwalton said seriously, Boston Fishing Show? Is it in Boston? Hearing the name of the fishing show, Zhonghai asked with some doubts. Of course, it's in Boston. This fishing show was first held in 1981. It's one of the 3 major exhibitions in the world, and it's also the largest exhibition in North America. If your fish takes the lead here, then it's reasonable for us to raise the price, and it's best for you to register another brand or company, so that it's more convenient to promote your fish and your beef. Looking at Zhonghai, Perwalton said with a serious face, and hearing her words, Zhonghai also remembered. Going to the fishing show is inevitable. After all, this fishing show is not far from him, and he is quite confident in his fish. As long as he goes, it should not be a problem for him to get an award. He is still very confident about this. Whether it's because he is from Boston, this is a face given by the host, or the quality of his fish, there will be no problem. But as Perwalton said, setting up a company? Zhonghai really didn't think about it, because he is very lazy and afraid of trouble. When he thought of all kinds of troubles after setting up a company, Zhonghai felt that his head was a little big. Forget it. Let's not talk about other things first. When is the fishing show? Shaking his head, Zhonghai decided to study this first. It's better to ask about the time first. After the spring, he will have a lot of work here. The Boston Fishing Show should be in the middle of April. After you go to Texas to attend the beef show, you can come back just in time to attend the fishing show. After thinking about it, Perwalton was not too sure. Although sometimes she would go to see if there was anything good that could be introduced to Sam's Club, these things were basically reminded by her assistant. She really can't remember the time. Zhonghai can also understand this. Time slowly passed while the two were discussing. In the blink of an eye, it was evening. Chia, Qijia, Azalina, Daliana, and Marian also came back. When they saw Perwalton and Cheryl Lee in the villa, they were stunned because they really didn't know that they would come. Really? You didn't tell me that there were guests at home. I'll prepare dinner. The first to react was Chia. She smiled and said to Zhonghai, then she was going to the kitchen to prepare dinner, but Perwalton also stood up at this time. Oh, we are all sisters. You don't have to be so polite. Cheryl, let's go help. The moment Perwalton finished speaking, the atmosphere in the villa was not very good, and it was instantly silent. Chapter 677. Oh hee, no need, we'll do it. You've driven here for a whole day. You should take a rest first. Glancing at Perwalton, the somewhat bewildered Cheryl, and Zhonghai, Qijie said with a serious face. Well, we'll do it. Hearing her elder sister's words, Qijie, who had already walked to the door, couldn't help but smile and said. Then, she walked into the kitchen and got busy. However, Perwalton and Cheryl didn't stay idle after exchanging glances with each other. Instead, they went to clean up the bowls and chopsticks. Zhonghai stood in the middle of the room. He felt that the atmosphere between the 4 people was undergoing a subtle change. It seemed that this change wasn't a good feeling. The hostility between the 4 people seemed to be somewhat vivid. In fact, for Perwalton, the initial relationship between her and Zhonghai was actually just a misunderstanding. In her heart, Zhonghai was more of a business partner. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thought of Zhonghai when something happened to her. However, since Zhonghai stood up for her at the Walmart Group's banquet, Perwalton's thoughts about Zhonghai had also quietly changed. It was true that she liked women, but she was sure that Zhonghai had unknowingly entered her heart. Now, she could also say that she liked Zhonghai. Originally, she didn't care who Zhonghai found because she didn't care at all. But now that she cared, she would pay attention to Zhonghai. She didn't care about Cheryl and the others. After all, they were people she once loved. Living with the people she loved and letting the people she loved love each other was something she could accept. But she had to consider other people. After all, Her point of view was no longer the same as Zhang Hai's. "Zhang Hai, what's going on?" After walking to Zhang Hai's side, Daliana whispered to Zhang Hai. She was indeed a bit confused. "How would I know?" Hearing her words, Zhang Hai didn't know what to say and muttered in a low voice. "It's all your fault. Aren't you going to settle it?" At this moment, Marian also sat over and said to Zhang Hai with a smile. "What does a little brat know? Go play somewhere else." Looking at the twins, Zhang Hai threw a disdainful glance at them before shifting his gaze to the kitchen. "Hopefully, there won't be any commotion tonight. Probably. TSK, how are we small? All you do is look at those big breasts of the Great Moon Empire. Why don't you pay attention to our development?" "Humph, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You idiot Zhang Hai." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Daliana patted Zhang Hai's shoulder, then stood up and went to help with Marian. But at this time, Zhang Hai's attention wasn't on them. He was still paying attention to the four guys. Fortunately, nothing happened during dinner, although the atmosphere was a bit awkward. After dinner, everyone packed up their things together. Then, Qi and Qi Jie took the initiative to arrange 2 rooms for Perwalton and Cheryl Lee. But they asked to stay in the same room. Qi and Qi Jie didn't care about it. After the arrangement, Qi Jie went directly to Zhang Hai's room. This was also a declaration of sovereignty. At least, she had to rely on Perwalton and Cheryl Lee. Her relationship with Zhang Hai might be closer. In this regard, Zhang Hai had no other way except for a little headache. He was really weak in dealing with relationships. After returning to the room, he naturally stayed with Qi Jie. They took a shower first, then did some exercise and took another shower. When the two hugged each other and were ready to sleep, it was already 11 o'clock in the evening. "Isn't this Perwalton a lesbian? Why? Did you take her down?" Curling up in Zhang Hai's arms like a kitten, Qi Jie looked at Zhang Hai and said with a look of contempt. Zhang Hai was really not picky. As long as he saw something good, he would eat it. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai didn't know how to respond. Could it be that his charm couldn't be stopped? "Don't joke around." "Ugh, hee, these are all accidents. But after the accident, there will be some trouble. But between her and me, it is estimated that we will never be together. After all, the forces she represents are not the same as mine. I don't want to be annexed by the Walton family. But she told me something today that is worth considering." Looking at Qi Jie in front of him, Zhang Hai wisely chose to change the topic. "What did she say?" Hearing Zhang Hai say that Perwalton's proposal was worth considering, Qi Jie couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and ask him. She was really afraid that Perwalton would make some excessive demands. "She asked me to set up a company or brand for the Soaring Dragon Manor, and then participate in various exhibitions. After making a name for myself, maybe I will earn more. The price of fish this year is not very good." Hearing Qi Jie's words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and said to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Jie's first thought was to oppose. After all, this was Perwalton's proposal. As a love rival, it was inevitable for her to oppose all her proposals, but she was a highly intelligent person after all. Thinking about it, she also understood that Perwalton did this to make more money, and Zhang Hai can also make more money. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but hesitate, although she knew that Zhang Hai didn't care much about money. But it was really not good to not earn money. And most importantly, Qi Jie always hoped that Zhang Hai could do something serious. Instead of staying at home all day, doing some improper things with Aphrodite and other little sluts. A man should still prioritize his career, so now when she heard Zhang Hai's words, Qi Jie really didn't know what to say. "I don't know much about these things. If you want to ask, you can ask my sister." In the end, she decided not to express her opinion. If it was some medical things, then she would naturally not decline, but now it was business things, she really didn't understand much. Asking Qi Li might be a good choice. After hearing her words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment. He really didn't understand. So he picked up the phone and dialed Qi Li's number. Although it was dark in the United States now, it was noon on the other side of the ocean. Qi Li had just finished dealing with a matter. At this time, she was sitting in front of the coffee table in her office, drinking the tea that Zhang Hai brought back for the new year while looking at the foggy sky of the capital. But the weather was not good. Qi Li's mood was still quite good. First, because the cheese company had officially stepped on the right track, and her revenge had been taken last year. Second, because the relationship between Zhang Hai and her was indeed developing in a good direction. In the case of a good relationship, the business was also quite good. No wonder Qi Li's mood was very good. In the past few days, her mood had been very good. Occasionally at night, she would think of Zhang Hai and feel a little lonely. I really wish I could just quit my job and stay by his side every day. She stretched and picked up her phone. She didn't know when, but the screen of her phone had changed to a photo of Zhang Hai. However, the image of Zhang Hai in the photo was not very good. At this time, he was squatting in the snow, holding a sweet potato in his hand and eating it. Coupled with the outdoor clothes he was wearing, he did look a little tattered. Who would have thought that such a guy was worth tens of billions of yuan? This photo was taken during the new year this year. Once, Zhang Hai was waiting for her downstairs. Maybe he was a little hungry, so he bought a roasted sweet potato and ate it there. When her car drove to the opposite side, she happened to see this scene, so she took a photo and used it as a meme. Looking at the photo of Zhang Hai pouting and frowning while eating the sweet potato, it could be said that he was not handsome at all. If it was anyone else, it would be an absolutely ugly photo, but in Qi Li's eyes, he was so cute, so handsome, so free and easy, and not pretentious at all. She had to admit that the phrase, "beauty is in the eye of the beholder," was really true. Her fingertips gently stroked Zhang Hai's photo, and Qi Li looked at him so infatuatedly. But at this moment, suddenly, a phone call came in. When she saw that the screen was black, Qi Li frowned subconsciously. She wanted to see who dared to disturb her time looking at Zhang Hai. But when she found out that the number was Zhang Hai's, she couldn't help but smile. "Hello, Zhang Hai." She immediately picked up the phone, and Qi Li's happy voice also passed into Zhang Hai's ears from the other side of the phone. "Hello, Qi Li, what are you doing now? Are you busy? Have you had lunch?" Listening to Qi Li's sweet voice, Zhang Hai couldn't help but ask her. It could be heard that since Qi Li and Zhang Hai had a substantial relationship, the relationship between the two had indeed improved by leaps and bounds. Hearing this, Qi Jia, who was in Zhang Hai's arms, couldn't help but feel a little jealous. She turned her body and grabbed Zhang Hai's vital part with her hands. Feeling Qi Jia's movements, Zhang Hai couldn't help but pinch her upper body. Feeling Zhang Hai's movements, Qi Jia couldn't help but soften a lot, but her hands were still moving. She looked at Zhang Hai coquettishly. She was telling Zhang Hai that she was jealous. "Fortunately, the company is fully on track now, and I don't have to work overtime anymore. Hee, as for lunch, of course I ate it. Humans are made of iron, and rice is made of steel, right? Right now, I'm sitting in the office drinking coffee." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li also spoke to Zhang Hai like a machine gun. Obviously, the two of them didn't feel uncomfortable talking about this kind of conversation. "Well, I'll be fine after lunch. By the way, I have something to ask you." Listening to Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai also smiled, and then told her about the things he said to Perwalton. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li fell into contemplation. When Qi Li was contemplating, Zhang Hai didn't urge her, but quietly waited for her to reply. As for Qi Jia at this time, she touched some of Zhang Hai's indescribable places and found that she was already a little moved, so she quietly sneaked into Zhang Hai's bed, opened her small mouth, and put some indescribable things into her mouth. Feeling her movements, Zhang Hai's body couldn't help but stiffen, but he couldn't do anything else. He had to admit that while he was on the phone with his nominal wife, his lower body was enjoying the movements of his sister-in-law. This made Zhang Hai feel a little stimulated, but he didn't know what to do. Perhaps because she felt Zhang Hai's discomfort, this encouraged Qi Jia to be arrogant. "Well, I thought about it. Perwalton's proposal is actually quite good. The seafood and beef in your manor, if they are really sold at the normal market price, they are really not worth much. If you can really package them and brand them, the effect may be better." At this time, Qi Li didn't know Zhang Hai's situation at this time, so after thinking about it, she still said to Zhang Hai, "Hissa? Oh, I see, but how do I set up this thing?" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai also reacted, so he asked her. In this regard, Qi Li really knew much more than Zhang Hai. In fact, it's very easy to set up a company, but you have to think about where to set it up. What are the benefits of setting it up in the United States? What are the benefits of setting it up in China? And what are the benefits of setting it up in China? It also needs some procedures and so on. It's quite troublesome. Hearing Zhang Hai ask her, Qi Li's heart couldn't help but move. In fact, it was indeed more troublesome to set up a company, but it also depended on the person. Who was Zhang Hai? A person with assets of billions of dollars and tens of billions of yuan. As long as he took out a few $100 million, it would be an extremely popular investment in any peaceful country in the world. It could be said that as long as he wanted, he could set up a company. But Qi Li was thinking about another problem. Anyway, Zhang Hai didn't know much about this. If he wanted to set up a company, then she was the only person to help. If he decided to set it up in China, then he would come back, so she could meet him. If he set up a company in the United States, then she could also help him, and they could still meet. Thinking of this, Qi Li couldn't help but praise herself in her heart. She had to admit that sometimes these little tricks were very useful. Oh, if that's the case, then I'll think about it, but I feel that my chances of setting up a company in the United States are higher. After listening to Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai thought about it. Now that his foundation was in the United States, it was indeed not easy for him to go back to China to set up a company. Okay, if you want to set it up, I'll help you take a look. By the way, Zhang Hai, I miss you. Chapter 678. I miss you too. Well, I won't delay your work any further. Tomorrow, I'll go to Moses Adams and settle the company's matters. He knows more about this than I do. If there's a need, I'll give you a call. Well, that's all for now. Listening to Qi Li's voice on the phone, Zhang Hai didn't know what to say now. He could only say a simple sentence and then quickly made a decision. After exchanging a few words with Qi Li, Zhang Hai hung up the phone directly. At the moment when he hung up the phone, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But with this sigh of relief, his waist couldn't help but loosen, and then Qi Jie's body stiffened. After about a minute or so, Qi Jie raised her head again. After glancing at Zhang Hai, she made a swallowing motion, then lowered her body again. After cleaning up, she went to the bathroom, brushed her teeth again, and returned to bed. Zhang Hai, I miss you. Nestled in Zhang Hai's arms, Qi Jie couldn't help but imitate Qi Li's voice on the phone just now and said to Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but slap her butt. This girl is too bad. TSK, you bad guy. Tell me, between me and my sister, who do you like more? Looking at Zhang Hai, Qi Jie raised her head and asked with a proud face. I'm not telling you. Sleep. Glancing at her, Zhang Hai hugged her sideways and closed his eyes. Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't answer her question directly, Qi Jie couldn't help but secretly snort at Zhang Hai, but then she laughed again. In fact, sometimes, it was better for her that Zhang Hai didn't make a choice, because if Zhang Hai really made a choice, it would be hard to say. Nestled in Zhang Hai's arms, Qi Jie had a good sleep. When she woke up the next morning, Zhang Hai was still sleeping. After washing up, she quietly left Zhang Hai's room. At this time, she didn't change into formal clothes because there were 2 guests in the villa. Instead, she seemed to be wearing more red fruits, as if to prove that something had happened between her and Zhang Hai last night. She only wore a tulle nightdress, and the 3 indescribable places were clearly visible. When she came downstairs, she happened to see that Walton and the others had already woken up. At this time, the 2 were in front of the warehouse. After seeing her, they walked into the warehouse. Looking at the seafood and beef that Zhang Hai raised there, the 2 heard footsteps and turned to look at the person who came. When they found that it was Qi Jie, they turned their heads back and continued to look at the ingredients in front of them. To be honest, I really envy you. Not only can you stay by Zhang Hai's side. Looking at the beef in front of her, Walton couldn't help but say with some emotion. Hearing her words, Qi Jie couldn't help but lean against the door of the warehouse and look at her like this. What's there to envy? If I remember correctly, Zhang Hai's family is far less rich than you and your family. When it comes to enjoying life, you are much better than Zhang Hai. Hearing Walton's words, Qi Jie said slowly. Life is not only determined by money. Here you can enjoy a lot of things that are difficult for me to enjoy. For example, the beef here, the seafood here. If I want to eat it, if it is not deducted from the company, I have to come here privately to get it. But if you want to eat it, you can eat it at any time. Another example is the pressure of life. I need to manage a big company and am busy every day, but you just need to quietly stay at home. Finally, there is Zhang Hai's body. If I want to do something with him, I have to look at your face and choose the time. But you don't need to, right? Anyone who has felt Zhang Hai's body knows that that feeling is addictive. Looking at Qi Jie in front of her, Prowalton said softly. After all, Prowalton received a different education, so she can say such words without changing her expression. But Qi Jie's face suddenly turned red, and her eyes were dodging, but she knew that this was not the time to avoid the question. If you want, you can also live in this villa. I believe that with Zhang Hai's relationship with you, he will not stop you from living here. Looking at Prowalton in front of her, Qi Jie said with a serious face. But this is impossible. You are a very smart girl, so you can see that Zhang Hai and I can't be together. Shaking her head, Prowalton glanced at Qi Jie. This little girl is really smart. This move of retreating in order to advance is really good. In that case you can only be envious. Shrugging, Qi Jie said with a smile. Then, without giving Prowalton a chance to fight back, she turned and left the door of the warehouse. Looking at her back, Prowalton's eyes narrowed. This girl is really interesting. But in the blink of an eye, she took her gaze back. Although she wanted to tease her, even if it was for Zhang Hai's sake, she would definitely not do so, so she just shrugged and took her gaze back. After a while, Zhang Hai got up with a yawn. After everyone had an awkward breakfast together, Zhang Hai called Moses Adams to determine if he was in Boston. At this time, Moses Adams was really not in Boston. He was attending a legal conference in New York, but he should be back at the company before 11 o'clock. Zhang Hai drove his Tesla Roadster to Boston. He hadn't tried the autopilot or the summoning function yet. Since he bought it, he only drove it to Winthrop once, which shocked Mayor Wallace. This time, he was prepared to go a long way. After confirming that the battery was sufficient, Zhang Hai drove the car on the road. The autopilot function is indeed very good. It allows Zhang Hai to drive the car on its own on the highway. He began to use his mobile phone to look up information. He looked up information about the Texas All-American Beef Cattle Competition and the Boston Fisheries Exhibition. This was the most important thing for him to do, so he must take it seriously. Now, Zhang Hai's beef could be said to have a certain degree of popularity in the northeast corner of the United States, but in the country, even Sam's Club had sold Zhang Hai's beef like crazy. But in fact, everyone didn't know that this beef was produced by Zhang Hai. But if the Texas American Beef Competition was like the one in New York, Zhang Hai's beef would crush everything. Then his reputation would really spread throughout the United States, and even Europe and China. If he had done this last year, it might have caused some unnecessary trouble because there were more people watching him. But this time it was different. After Zhang Hai had a certain amount of chips, he was no longer a softie, but a hedgehog. If you want to catch him, then you have to be prepared to get your hands pierced. He is not an easy target to make a move on. While thinking about these two competitions, Zhang Hai went to Boston Moses Adams Lawyer Building. But when he arrived, he was stunned for a moment. Zhang Hai had been to Moses Adams Lawyer Building before. This was an office building, near the city center of Boston, with a total of 27 floors. Just like in China, the boss here rented each floor to a different company. The original Moses Adams had some reputation in Boston, but his reputation was not very prominent. He only rented about 1/3 of the 15th floor and set up his own law firm. This was also because of Zhang Hai's help. Zhang Hai remembered that when his law firm opened, Zhang Hai came. At that time, in addition to his law firm, there were 4 companies on the 15th floor. A real estate management company, a trading company, a construction company, and an advertising company. But in just a few months, almost a year, not only did he occupy the 15th floor, but he also occupied the 16th floor. Yes, standing in this office building, Zhang Hai looked at the nameplate. The 15th and 16th floors were Adams' law firm. He is really awesome. Whispering in a low voice, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh at himself. It seems that Moses Adams is also slowly getting better. Of course, he knows that Moses Adams is where he is today, and it is inseparable from him. Let's go, don't lament here. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai threw the thought that he was indeed a salted fish in the back of his mind and then walked into the elevator. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor. As soon as Zhang Hai walked out of the elevator door, he saw the front desk of Adams' law firm. At this time, a young man in a suit, tie, and gold-rimmed glasses was signing for something at this time. The girls at the front desk were like love-struck fools at this time, looking at the man in front of them, fantasizing about what happened with this man. Of course, Zhang Hai didn't know what happened. In fact, this guess was also full of malice. Zhang Hai didn't know him, but this didn't stop him. In Zhang Hai's view, a guy who dressed like this and exuded an arrogant aura was destined to not be a good person, so he directly jumped over him and looked at the front desk inside. "Hello, sir, how can I help you?" Seeing Zhang Hai's head suddenly popping out from the side, the front desk here was stunned for a moment, but her good manners still made her instantly show 8 teeth and said to Zhang Hai with a smile. And the man with glasses here, after hearing the words of the front desk, couldn't help but look back and saw Zhang Hai at a glance. He couldn't help but have some doubts. He glanced at Zhang Hai, but he didn't know who Zhang Hai was, so he didn't speak. "Oh, I'm here to look for." Seeing this scene without drama, Zhang Hai despised the man with glasses in his heart. At this time, shouldn't he be very pretentious and say, "Kid, don't you know first come, first served?" Or, "Don't you see me here? Get out." Or something like that. He didn't say it. Zhang Hai couldn't slap his face according to the routine. He hated the feeling of not being in control the most, but fortunately, Zhang Hai was not a face-slapping maniac, so he adjusted his mood and explained his purpose to the front desk. "Why are you here?" But at this moment, a voice interrupted Zhang Hai, who wanted to explain his purpose of coming. Then everyone looked at the source of the voice. Zhang Hai found a tall woman with a somewhat cold face. At this time, she was wearing a white office lady suit and appeared in front of Zhang Hai. When she saw Zhang Hai, she frowned. She didn't understand. "Miss Dale." As soon as they saw this woman, the 5 front desk here stood up at the same time, bowed respectfully to this woman, and then said to her with some fear, "Cough, I said I came to see you. Do you believe me?" Zhang Hai looked at this woman and couldn't help but smile. Yes, this woman was none other than Penelope Dale, the daughter of the second in command of the cowboy in Zhang Hai's manor, Burke Dale. Zhang Hai had met her many times and even had the opportunity to be alone with her, but the relationship between the two didn't seem to be very good. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Penelope's frown deepened, and the man with glasses next to Zhang Hai couldn't help but raise his head. "Please don't joke, Mr. Zhang." Penelope heard what Zhang Hai said and couldn't help but say with some depression. In fact, Zhang Hai was not only her boss's boss, but she was also her father's boss. The relationship between the two was indeed a bit. "Penelope, do you need my help?" Seeing Penelope clearly rejected Zhang Hai's words, coupled with her frown, the man with glasses couldn't help but move to her side with an obscene smile. Some young and ignorant people also called this the smile of a warm man. He said to Penelope, but Penelope just looked back at him calmly. "No need. Also, please call me Miss Dale." "Thank you." Looking at the man beside her, Penelope calmly refused him. Hearing Penelope's words, the man with glasses also shrugged. Obviously, he was used to her attitude. "Mr. Zhang Hai, you haven't explained your intention yet." "Forget it, it doesn't matter. Come with me to the office." Then Penelope couldn't help but turn her head and look at Zhang Hai. But halfway through, she gave up. She knew that Zhang Hai definitely wouldn't say anything good. Anyway, she was really familiar with Zhang Hai. She wasn't afraid that he would have any bad intentions, and she knew that he wouldn't make a move. She was still very clear about what kind of person Zhang Hai was. He had evil intentions but no guts, but he liked to joke, so she led Zhang Hai into her office. When Zhang Hai walked into her office, Zhang Hai seemed to hear many men's broken hearts and glasses. Chapter 679. Who is that guy? He can actually enter Miss Penelope's office. I really envy him. He can actually take the initiative to enter Miss Penelope's office. He is so happy. That guy can't be Miss Penelope's boyfriend, right? It looks like they have known each other for a long time. Oh my God, look at that guy. How could Miss Penelope fall in love with him? Don't talk nonsense, or I will break up with you. Miss Penelope is my goddess. Yes, don't talk nonsense. Even if they have a relationship, it must be that he has something on Miss Penelope. It must be like this. It seems that you, the ice goddess, are still very popular here. Putting down the curtains on the window, Zhang Hai looked at the people outside who were about to riot and couldn't help but smile and talk to Penelope. Especially the man with glasses just now, who had been standing there and staring at the office here. Zhang Hai saw clearly that his fists had been clenched, but he didn't dare to come in. He didn't know if he was afraid of Penelope or afraid of himself. After listening to Zhang Hai's remarks, Penelope just glanced at him and sat at her desk. At this time, Zhang Hai also came over and glanced at the name tag on the desk. Lawyer. Ms. Penelope Daller. Oh, don't tell me you are a lawyer. You can already take on cases by yourself? Looking at Penelope, Zhang Hai said with some surprise. This is all thanks to you. After going to Huaxia with you, because I had some exchanges with the people in Huaxia, after coming back, Mr. Adams asked me to take charge of the case about Huaxia. The original internship period has passed, so I directly became a full-time employee. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Penelope said to Zhang Hai without raising her head. For her, she really had to thank Zhang Hai for this matter. This is also the result of your hard work. Sitting opposite Penelope, Zhang Hai no longer had the intention to tease her when they were alone. In fact, in Zhang Hai's view, he and Burkdollar should be of the same generation. After all, he was Burkdollar's boss. He didn't care if Edward Anderson called him uncle. They were of the same generation, so Penelope should be his niece. Therefore, it was fine to joke around sometimes. Of course, they couldn't do it in public, but they still had to be serious in private. Are you here to look for Mr. Adams? He should be back before 11. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Penelope nodded gratefully, but her eyes were still cold and she was talking about serious matters. Well, this time I want to turn my manor into a company or brand. Then I'll go to Texas to participate in the beef show, and then come back to Boston to participate in the fishing show. Without a company's name, this product won't be so easy to sell. Hearing Penelope's words, Zhang Hai also answered seriously. He did come here for this, so there was no need to lie. Well, if you sell your beef and seafood according to the market price, it will be a loss. Although she didn't get along well with Zhang Hai, she had always been a very upright person. Not to mention that she had no enmity with Zhang Hai, only gratitude. Even if there was enmity between them, she wouldn't lie through her teeth. She had eaten Zhang Hai's beef and seafood, which could be said to be the best of their kind. If they sold it according to the market price, it would be a huge loss. The beef was still okay because the price was there. But seafood was different. Any fish had the taste of bluefin tuna back, but it only sold for a few dollars. It was too much of a scam. So I came to ask Moses Adams. He is an expert in this area. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also smiled and said to her. Hearing what Zhang Hai said, Penelope naturally didn't doubt it, so she quieted down and continued to look at the file in front of her. Looking at Penelope's appearance, Zhang Hai smiled and shook his head. This girl is really special. But she is not Zhang Hai's type. He still prefers to take the initiative. After all, he is not a good person to take the initiative. He is basically being counteracted. He can't control a girl who is too passive. So he sat on the sofa and picked up his mobile phone to play. After playing the game for a while, Moses Adams also came back. When he came back, Zhang Hai had been in Penelope's room for almost an hour, but the people outside were anxious. But Penelope had already said that no one could enter her office casually. Even if it was an urgent matter, it had to be called by phone. In fact, Zhang Hai didn't know that Penelope was obsessed with cleanliness. She couldn't tolerate the smell of others in her private space. Zhang Hai might be an exception. Now that Moses Adams was back, the men outside naturally seemed to have found their backbone. They immediately exaggerated with him, hoping that Moses Adams could uphold justice for them and kick Zhang Hai out. Sure enough, when he heard the person at the front desk say that Penelope called the person Mr. Zhang Hai, Moses Adams suddenly became anxious. He walked quickly to Penelope Daller's door, and then knocked on the door in front of everyone. This made the people outside very anxious. What a joke. Shouldn't he kick the door open directly at this time? Why is he knocking on the door now? These men had now begun to imagine in their minds. Originally, in this 1 hour, Zhang Hai and Penelope must have had some intimate relationship. The plot should be that Zhang Hai had caught her weakness, something that could make her unable to inherit her beloved job as a lawyer. Using this weakness, he took advantage of her weakness, and at the same time, asked her for money. If it was an acquaintance, Penelope's coldness just now would not be possible. Penelope's expression clearly showed that she was not willing to see him, but she was afraid of him and had to compromise. In the eyes of these people who suffered losses, got angry, drank some water, and became dirty, the plot of Zhang Hai and Penelope should be like this. At this time, in this hour, Zhang Hai should be in the room, taking advantage of Penelope. It was not easy for their backbone, Moses, Adams, to come over, but he still knocked on the door? Was he reminding the two people in the room to get dressed? Who is it? Hearing the knock on the door, Penelope, who had been reading the file, couldn't help but look up and ask. Obviously, she didn't know the story outside. This kind of story generally happened in Japan. This kind of plot also had an English name called NTR. In layman's terms, it was Tauren. Penelope didn't know that she had been fantasized as a female character in NTR. If she knew, she would probably bite the person outside to death. It's me, is Mr. Zhang Hai here? Hearing Penelope's words, this country's Moses, Adams immediately responded in a low voice. Oh, I'm here. But just as his voice fell, Zhang Hai, who happened to be sitting on the other side of the door, opened the door. Mr. Zhang Hai, I'm really sorry to have kept you waiting for so long. As soon as he saw Zhang Hai, Moses, Adams's lackey mode went online in an instant. He held Zhang Hai's hand and almost rushed to kiss it. It was quite lively. It's okay, anyway, I'm just staying at home. Your business is urgent, so it's more important. Zhang Hai was also a very easygoing person, so he didn't care about this. He waved his hand and said to him, I say, can you two go to the living room? But at this moment Penelope, who was sitting there, suddenly couldn't help but ask. Oh yes, I forgot. Mr. Zhang, let's go to the living room. The front desk will send 2 cups of green tea. As soon as he heard Penelope's words, Moses, Adams immediately patted his head and said, then shouted to the front desk. After that, the two of them left Penelope's room. After the two of them left, Penelope also walked out of the room. Looking at the goddess's normal expression and unchanged attire, the men outside couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Could it be that nothing happened just now? Penelope was too lazy to care about what these people were thinking. Instead, she closed her door and walked into the office. Then she took out her wet wipes and wanted to wipe the sofa where Zhang Hai sat, but she froze for a moment. Then she put away the wet wipes again, walked back to her desk, and continued to read the files. Because she found that the place where Zhang Hai sat was not dirty. This was the first time she felt this way. At this time, Zhang Hai and Moses, Adams also walked into the living room, and Zhang Hai also explained his intentions. Boss, you are finally going to set up a company. You have to know that this is what I am best at. Hearing that Zhang Hai was finally going to set up a company, Moses, Adams was quite excited. He slammed the table and then said excitedly, after we set up the company, we can make your brand's name known. With the guarantee of Walmart, we can be listed on Nasdaq and start to sell shares. Your property will go from a few billion to tens of billions. At that time, I will be the youngest billionaire. The sky is your limit. Give me 3 years, and I will operate your brand into the world's largest top food brand. Looking at Zhang Hai, it was obvious that Moses Adams was a little too excited, and his words were a little off topic. Moses, maybe you are mistaken about one thing. I am not going to be listed or anything. I am just going to set up a company and a brand to make my soaring dragon manners name known. Moreover, I don't need others to invest in me. My company naturally needs to be 100% controlled by me. Looking at Moses, Adams in front of him, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and interrupted him. Was he thinking too much? Just setting up a company and a brand? Hearing Zhang Hai say this, Moses, Adams also woke up from his dream, and then smiled a little. It seemed that Zhang Hai still had no intention of influencing the world. Just setting up a company and a brand. Yes, Zhang Hai really had no ambition. Influencing the world? Forget it, it is more important to have a good sleep. This is easy. I can help you with the company. The same goes for the brand. Just apply for a trademark registration. But boss, I am a lawyer. I can be your company's legal counsel, but I can't manage the company for you. You need to find a professional manager. Understanding Zhang Hai's meaning, Moses, Adams also officially entered the role of a lawyer and said to Zhang Hai, well, I will study this myself. How much does the company's registration fund need? Nodding, Zhang Hai was very clear that Moses Adams was very busy. He really did not have the time and mood to manage his own company, and Zhang Hai was not going to let him manage it. Speaking of which, this company naturally had to be handed over to someone he trusted, but among the people he trusted, there was no one with business talent. Except for Qi Li, there seemed to be no one. The rest of Qi Jie only knew medicine, Chia only knew how to cook, Feng Yunchen only knew how to mess things up, Ai Xiaoxi did not even step into society, Azalina only knew how to kill, and Aphrodite and the others had no skills except in bed. Selena Gomez was an artist, and Perwalton was also in charge of Sam's club. So after thinking about it, among the women around him, it seemed that only Qi Li had this talent. Then, after settling things here first, he would go to Qi Li. This doesn't matter. Your company is nothing more than to promote your brand. You have long-term partners, so you don't need to find other channels and get benefits. So, hundreds of thousands can operate normally. Of course, if you have more money, you can do it faster. I just heard that you want to do it before the National Beef Show next month, so I recommend that your registration fund is 3 million. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams said seriously. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai did not say anything and directly transferred 3 million to his card. Faced with Zhang Hai's trust, Moses Adams also did business according to the rules and specially signed an entrustment agreement. Otherwise, he would not have taken Zhang Hai's $3 million. After signing with Moses Adams, Zhang Hai also took the agreement and prepared to leave. Moses Adams went directly to the Public Business Bureau in Boston to handle the affairs of Zhang Hai's company. As for Zhang Hai, under the hostile gazes of the men, he left the office and went downstairs to his car. He picked up his phone and hesitated for a moment. He decided to go home and talk to Qi Jie before calling Qi Li. If he called directly, it would be troublesome if Qi Li came over and saw Qi Jie and Qi Ya. After all, in Qi Li's world, these two sisters were still in Miami. Chapter 680. The time was 8:30 in the morning. In a coffee shop outside Feng Yunchen's company. At this time, 3 people are sitting opposite each other, and these 3 people are all related to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai's wife in name, Qi Li. Zhang Hai's first lover, his junior high school classmate Feng Yunchen. Zhang Hai's second lover, Ai Xiaoxi. It's really awkward for these 3 people to sit together. Although they are already very familiar with each other, their relationship is very subtle. Why are you looking for us? Finally, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't hold back. She put down the spoon that stirred the coffee cup in front of her and looked up at Qi Li. Hearing her words, Qi Li and Feng Yunchen also put down the things in their hands. It seems that the topic is finally about to start. Zhang Hai called me. I'm going to Winthrop tomorrow. When Zhang Hai confirmed the company's registration, it was almost 12 o'clock. It's noon in the United States, but it's midnight in China. At that time, he also sent a message to Qi Li, but Qi Li saw it this morning. After seeing it, she had already decided to go to Winthrop, but not today, because she has to arrange the company's affairs today. She booked a ticket for tomorrow, but before going, it doesn't prevent her from meeting Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen first. Zhang Hai asked you to go? Hearing what she said, Feng Yunchen asked with some doubts. She didn't understand why Zhang Hai asked Qi Li to go. Hearing what she said, Qi Li also nodded proudly. Then why did you ask us to come here this time? To warn us, or do you have something to say? Looking at Qi Li's appearance, Ai Xiaoxi, whose mentality has changed a lot, couldn't help but frown and ask Qi Li, why did she look for me? I asked you to come here because I want you to go with me. Staring at the 2 women in front of her, Qi Li directly expressed her intention. Why? You should know that we don't seem to have a very harmonious relationship. Hearing Qi Li's words, Feng Yunchen asked with some worry. It could be said that there was a clear hatred between them and Qi Li, but now Qi Li actually wanted to bring them to see Zhang Hai. Why was this? This made them a little confused. Could it be that he wanted to call them over to watch them show off their affection? But thinking about it, Zhang Hai couldn't possibly be like this. He really couldn't understand what Lu Li meant. Just answer me. Are you going or not? Looking at the 2 puzzled women in front of her, Qi Li gently brushed her hair behind her ear and said with a smile. She naturally had her own reasons for wanting to go. As for Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi, she really didn't care about them.
This.
Hearing Qi Li's words, Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi looked at each other. Both of them were hesitant. You really decided to let Qi Li come over? At this moment, sitting on the bed in Zhang Hai's room, Qi Jie glanced at Qi Ya, who was sitting beside her, and Zhang Hai, who was sitting opposite her. Hearing their words, Zhang Hai also touched his nose slightly awkwardly. Sister. Big sister is indeed the person who is most familiar with business operations.
Zhang Hai.
It's right for brother-in-law to call her over. Gently poking Qi Jie, Qi Ya said to her with a smile, but her calling him brother-in-law gave Zhang Hai goosebumps all over his body.
Ai, it's really...
Ugh, it's a blessing for me to meet your sister. He said awkwardly, but when he saw Qi Jie and Qi Ya's gaze, he changed his words halfway and shook his head helplessly.
He had met the wrong person.
It's good that you know. The office is a big deal. Just call her over. Rolling her eyes at Zhang Hai, he changed his mind quickly. Qi Jie muttered softly with her chin in her hand. Although she also knew that it was difficult for her to stay with Qi Li by Zhang Hai's side. Then are you going to tell Qi Li the truth about our relationship? Looking at Qi Jie and Qi Ya, Zhang Hai thought for a while and said to them, Tell the truth? No, I'm not going to do that. She shook her head. The relationship between Qi Jie and Qi Li was not particularly good. If this layer of relationship was added, then it would be even more confusing.
Then are you leaving?
Listening to Qi Jie's words, Zhang Hai was confused, and then asked with some confusion. He did not mean to drive away other women because of his woman. In Zhang Hai's heart, although he did not treat everyone equally, he would definitely not do such a thing. However, in Zhang Hai's view, this was really troublesome. I'm not leaving, I'm going back to Miami temporarily. Since I've decided to stay here for a long time, I'm going back to sell my research institute. The things inside also need to be cleaned up. Qi Jie glanced at Zhang Hai and said very indifferently. But Zhang Hai could hear the disappointment and reluctance in her words. After all, they had been together for a long time, and she had also lived here for a long time. We can't always be like this. Otherwise, let's just tell the truth. Looking at her appearance, Zhang Hai bit his lip. He hated people like this very much. Instead of this, it was better to be direct. So he thought for a while, and said to Qi Jie and Qi Ya, the three sisters, so be it. Anyway, things had already happened. What else could Zhang Hai say? It was impossible for him to deny anything. Let's talk about it later. At least before Qi Li is ready to live here, we are still your sisters-in-law. Okay, you can make an appointment with Qi Li. We will leave tomorrow. Looking at Zhang Hai's decision in front of her, Qi Jie also smiled. In fact, she wanted Zhang Hai's answer more. Now that Zhang Hai had said the answer, there was no need for her to say more. Zhang Hai was mentally prepared, but she wasn't ready yet. She needed to think about it carefully. Tonight, you have to feed me until I'm full. Thinking of this, Qi Jie stood up and took the initiative to sit on Zhang Hai's lap. She said to Zhang Hai with a confused look. At the same time, she gave Qi Ya a look, telling her to leave and close the door. However, Qi Ya did close the door, but she did not leave. Instead, she turned back. I also want to live here. Looking at Zhang Hai and Qi Jie, Qi Ya whispered. After hearing this, Qi Jie could not help but feel her heart skip a beat. Then, she slapped Zhang Hai's chest. She was wondering why Xiaoya and Zhang Hai had been acting strangely recently. It turned out that something had happened to them. You bastard, we three sisters. Are you not going to let any of us go? Qi Jie said angrily as she glared at Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also smiled awkwardly and did not talk back. Instead, he directly hugged Qi Jie in front of him and kissed her affectionately. As Qi Jie's gaze drifted away, Qi Ya also walked over. After taking off her coat, she hugged Zhang Hai from behind and gently bit his ear. Recently, she had been holding it in for a long time. Zhang Hai had been very busy. It was a silent night. In fact, there was no way to talk about it. If they wrote about what they said, the book would be banned. When Zhang Hai woke up the next morning, Qi Jie and Qi Ya had already left. The one who sent them off was Azalina. In fact, Zhang Hai had already woken up very early, but he did not choose to come downstairs to send them off because he did not know how to face them. So after confirming that they had left, Zhang Hai came downstairs. In the villa, Delina and Marian went to send Qi Jia and Chia off, leaving only Perwalton and Cheryl Lee. Seeing Zhang Hai coming down, Perwalton also went up to him. She completely ignored Zhang Hai's slightly melancholy gaze. She wrapped her arms around his neck and took the initiative to kiss him. "Doesn't your wife know about what happened between you and other women? Why did you send them away?" After their lips parted for a long time, Perwalton looked at the sad Zhang Hai and couldn't help but say with a smile. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai could only shrug. Because there were some words that he couldn't say. After all, these things were quite embarrassing to talk about. "It doesn't matter. You have been in a state of use for the past few days. I thought I was going to come in vain. Your wife will come tomorrow, but today, you belong to us." Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't answer, Perwalton didn't care. After chuckling, she directly pushed Zhang Hai onto the sofa. Compared to the bed, she preferred other places. As for Cheryl Lee, after watching the flames of war reignite here, she also joined the battle group. She liked Perwalton, but she also liked Zhang Hai. For that kind of thing she also enjoyed it. The flames of war reignited in the living room of the villa. In the evening, Perwalton and Cheryl Lee also entered Zhang Hai's room. This was the first time they did this kind of thing in Zhang Hai's room, but if they didn't get used to sleeping on the jade bed, it would really be a trap. The next morning, when Zhang Hai left, they also got up, but they didn't wake up. They were woken up by the bed and went back to their rooms to sleep. After instructing Aphrodite and the others to help clean the room, Zhang Hai drove his battle shield and headed to New York. On the way, Zhang Hai casually bought 2 burritos to fill his stomach and rushed all the way. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, he arrived at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Looking at the time, there was still more than an hour before the flight arrived, so he wasn't too late. So Zhang Hai sat in the car and played with his mobile phone. Unknowingly, more than an hour had passed. As Qi Li's phone rang, Zhang Hai also answered the phone. After asking about the location, Zhang Hai closed the door and walked into the waiting hall. But as soon as he came in, he saw 4 women standing together and walking out. When he saw who these 4 women were, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel a drop of cold sweat on his forehead. Zhang Hai knew these 4 people. Qi Li, this was inevitable. The person next to her was her assistant. Until now, Zhang Hai didn't know her name. Zhang Hai was also familiar with the other 2 people, Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen. Zhang Hai couldn't understand why they were here. "Oh, you're here. Are you tired?" Seeing the 4 people coming in front of him, Zhang Hai smiled and greeted them. Although he was surprised why Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi came, since they were here, Zhang Hai couldn't ask here, so he went forward to pick up the luggage. But with this, he awkwardly found that he didn't know who to pick up. Whether it was Feng Yunchen, Ai Xiaoxi, or Qi Li, they all brought a big bag of luggage. Seeing this, Zhang Hai was really embarrassed. "Go and get a trolley." Looking at Zhang Hai's embarrassed look, Qi Li couldn't help but glare at him. This guy likes to flirt. This time, I'll let him see the disadvantages of having too many women. But fortunately, she just looked at Zhang Hai awkwardly for a while. Then she helped Zhang Hai out of the awkward situation. "Ow!" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai immediately ran to a distance and pushed a trolley over. He loaded the luggage of the 4 people into the trolley, then pushed it out of the airport. After leaving the airport, they naturally took their luggage down and carried it themselves. They came to Zhang Hai's car. After putting the luggage in the car, the 5 people also sat in the car together. Although Zhang Hai's battle shield was a standard seat for 5 people, because the car was really big, Qi Li sat in the front passenger seat, and the 3 people sitting behind her didn't feel crowded at all. However, Zhang Hai still felt that the atmosphere in the car was quite awkward. He wanted to find something to say, but he found that he didn't seem to have anything to say. It was better to stay silent. In the end, it was Qi Li who spoke first. She looked at Zhang Hai and said with a serious face, "Can you talk about the progress on your side?" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai also had a rare opportunity to speak. "Oh, progress. I went to Moses Adams the day before yesterday, and the company has been registered. It's called Tinglong Company, and the brand is also called Tinglong. It's mainly to promote my beef and seafood and form a brand effect. The registration capital is $3 million, and it should be approved soon. Do you have any opinions or suggestions?" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai also had a rare opportunity to speak. Soaring dragon, although it's a bit old-fashioned, it's not bad. Now that the company has not come down, everything is just talk. After the company comes down, you have to decide what your company will do. In fact, in my opinion, there is no special need for you to promote your brand. Walton, I have the sea market, we can scrape your meat clean, and we can also buy your seafood. So what you said about promotion is not necessary. You just have to ensure the effect of your brand, and your company. I think it's better to do transportation. After listening to Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li thought for a moment and then said to him. Chapter 681. Transportation. Listening to Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai fell into contemplation while driving. Yes, transportation. After you win the award, the necessary publicity is necessary, but you don't have to worry about your transportation. Although I don't want to admit it, Walton will solve your problem of mass transportation. Haishang Supermarket and I are enough to solve your remaining supply. In the future, even if you raise more and more cows, we can still eat them. But there is one thing that we can't earn, and that is the money for logistics. Qi Li heard that Zhang Hai listened and explained to him. Not all companies were like Walton, which had many planes, whether it was Qi Li or Haishang Supermarket. They didn't have private cargo planes. If they wanted to distribute the beef everywhere, Haishang Supermarket needed to use the Walmart Group's channels. In this way, they would naturally lose some money and the initiative of the beef. Similarly, Qi Li also needed to spend money to transport the beef back from the United States. Not only was it expensive, but most importantly, it was time-consuming. It was not worth it. Therefore, instead of handing this business to others, it was better to hand it over to Zhang Hai directly. Zhang Hai's company didn't need to do anything else. It only needed to deliver the beef to domestic or Haishang Supermarket on time. And it could also take some private jobs. The money for private jobs was enough for the normal operation of the company. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai couldn't help but touch his chin. This might be a good idea. Zhang Hai was already a little tempted, but after going back, he had to discuss it with Walton and Zhang Dihai. Walton definitely wouldn't use Zhang Hai's logistics, but Zhang Dihai could. And if he didn't use it, then Zhang Hai's logistics company would only deliver the beef to Qi Li. It seemed that the loss outweighed the gain. It's possible to set up a logistics company. We'll discuss it when we get back. But the problem is, I don't know how to start a company. It's such a small company. You can't possibly come and take charge of it. What should I do? After thinking about it, Zhang Hai felt that this thing was quite reliable, but he still didn't understand the person in charge of this company. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li smiled. Come, let me introduce you. This is Zheng Jin, my assistant. She has been with me for many years and is quite capable. This time, I brought her here mainly to let her work in your company. If you agree, she can help you manage the company. With a smile, Qi Li pointed to the somewhat absent-minded assistant behind her and said to Zhang Hai. It was the first time Zhang Hai knew that the assistant was called Zheng Jin. He didn't pay attention before. Following Qi Li's finger, Zhang Hai also glanced through the rearview mirror. Maybe she heard Qi Li's words. Zheng Jin also turned her head, looked at Zhang Hai, and nodded gently. Let's talk about it when we get back. But looking at her, Zhang Hai didn't say much, because Zhang Hai didn't have a good impression of her. When he was with Qi Li, this girl was always in his way. Although she didn't humiliate him in front of his face, Zhang Hai still remembered the look in her eyes. For Qi Li's sake, Zhang Hai didn't want to lower himself to her level. However, it was impossible for him to have a good impression of her. Now that he wanted to hand over his company to her, Zhang Hai had to think about it. Zhang Hai didn't mind. Hearing Zhang Hai say this, Qi Li also chuckled. She knew the conflict between Zhang Hai and her assistant, but she had no choice. First, she completely trusted her assistant. Second, she also needed to arrange someone in Zhang Hai's new company. This was not because she was worried about Zhang Hai, but because she was worried about other people. She was very clear about Zhang Hai's character. As for the company, after he set it up, he would probably leave it there and no longer care about it. If he found someone he didn't trust, it was likely that he would take the company away. So even if it was for Zhang Hai, She had to let Zhang Hai keep Zhang Jin. Soon, Zhang Hai changed the topic. In the middle of March, New York and Boston were pretty good. Although there were still a little points, most of the land had been exposed. New seedlings were growing, and the roadside trees were budding. Everywhere was lush, and it was really beautiful. Zhang Hai talked about his newly bought cattle and the seafood he had salvaged. For a while, the atmosphere in the car was very good. A few hours later, Zhang Hai's car returned to Winthrop's manor. After arriving at the manor, Zhang Hai stopped the car and helped them carry their luggage into the villa. As soon as they walked in, they saw Perwalton, Cheryl Lee, Delina, Marion, and Azalina in the villa at this time.
Hey, my darlings, how are you?
Looking at the 5 people in the house, Chili first nodded to Perwalton and Cheryl Lee, then smiled at Azalina. She then walked to Zhang Hai's 2 daughters, Delina and Marion. She hugged the 2 daughters and said with a smile. Because they had seen each other more often, Delina, Marion, and Chili were also familiar with each other. Although they didn't call her mother, they also smiled and chatted with her. On the other hand, Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen were a little stupefied because they didn't know Perwalton and Cheryl. Most importantly, they couldn't speak English. Among these foreigners, only Delina and Marion could speak some Chinese. Azalina only knew a little about it, so she stood there awkwardly. Fortunately, Azalina was very helpful. She pulled them to sit down and used her simple Chinese to make the 2 girls gradually relax. As for Zhang Hai, seeing that there was nothing to do here, he took their luggage and arranged rooms for them. Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen were going to stay in the same room where they stayed last time. Although people came and went in Zhang Hai's house, the rooms were very fixed. This was because there were a lot of rooms. The last time they came, they stayed in this room. But just as they were about to arrange a room for Chili and Zhang Jin, Chili stood up and threw her luggage into Zhang Hai's room. This action was clearly a declaration of sovereignty. Everyone couldn't help but be surprised. However, Chili appeared to be very calm. After throwing away her luggage, she sat down and started chatting again. As for Zhang Jin, she went to the last room. It could be seen that she was still very unsociable. It was understandable. These women had some kind of relationship with Zhang Hai, but she didn't. It was very awkward for her to stay here. While they were chatting, Zhang Hai also called Old Master Zhang Dihai. Recently, Zhang Hai often went to China, so he rarely went to Old Master Zhang's small supermarket to buy things because most of them were sent from China. However, the relationship between the 2 didn't break. A while ago, Zhang Hai went to get some tea leaves. But speaking of which, it was almost the Qingming festival. Zhang Hai's tea leaves should be the first batch. Thinking about the tea leaves he planted, Zhang Hai was a little excited. He didn't know how they would taste. Zhang Hai was afraid that these tea leaves would be blown by the wind and frozen by the snow, so he specially planted them in a warehouse. The temperature was adjusted to the best standard. The soil used was also the most fertile water here. Moreover, he specially watered it with water that was filled with Zhang Hai's spiritual energy. He hoped that the taste of these tea leaves could satisfy Zhang Hai. The topic was digressed again. Zhang Hai called Old Master Zhang Dihai, not to exchange pleasantries, but to tell him about his establishment of a company and that his company was going to do transportation. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Zhang Dihai agreed on the other side. For him, transportation was also a headache. Although Walmart's channel was good, it was really troublesome. Not to mention the money, this was inevitable. Although Zhang Hai's transportation would be cheaper, it also had to be charged. However, everything had to be done according to the time of Sam's Club, which made him a little depressed. For example, when he went there, sometimes the meat in his store was sold out, but the meat in Sam's Club was not sold out, so he had to wait. When the meat in his store was not sold out, but the meat in Sam's Club was sold out, then they would come in. It was really troublesome. If Zhang Hai could be responsible for the transportation, it would naturally be better. It could also ensure freshness and time. Thinking of this, Zhang Dihai agreed instantly. This was also a good thing for him, so he was very happy. After getting Zhang Dihai's consent, Zhang Hai was relieved. During dinner, Zhang Hai also explained the situation in the restaurant. When Perwalton learned that Zhang Hai wanted to do transportation, she did not object. Instead, she nodded gently. In her opinion, Zhang Hai's transportation was still very good. Just like what Qi Li and Zhang Dihai said, Zhang Hai's transportation was indeed beneficial to them. But it was not good for Perwalton and Walmart. Originally, they could still receive Zhang Dihai's money. But now Perwalton's heart was not with Walmart. So when she heard that Zhang Hai wanted to do logistics and transportation, she agreed. She also told Zhang Hai what he needed. Transportation was naturally needed to do transportation. When it came to transportation, the first thing that came to mind was a car. But to be honest, a car did not matter. Because if it was close, whether it was the Haishang supermarket or Chile, they could solve it by themselves. It was not like they did not have a car. Perwalton's transportation was a plane. To be exact, it was a cargo plane. If you wanted to quickly transport the goods to major cities without smelly, a plane was the best choice. Although there was ice, the ice could only last for 7 days. Frozen beef could not be sold at a high price. Speaking of cargo planes, Zhang Hai really did not know much about it. Fortunately, Perwalton was very clear about it. The so-called cargo plane was the cargo version of a large and medium-sized passenger plane. The biggest difference between a cargo plane and a passenger plane was that there was an F on the model of a cargo plane, which represented a cargo plane. And because of the greater load, it could only take off and land in large and medium-sized airports. It could not take off and land in small airports. In other words, if Zhang Hai wanted to buy a cargo plane, he needed to go to the nearby Boston airport to rent a runway and a hangar there. In addition, he needed to buy a flight route to major cities in the United States. He also needed to talk to the customs so that he could ship to Huaxia. These things were very troublesome. Zhang Hai felt a headache when he heard it. But Zheng Jin listened very carefully. She had also been in contact with logistics in China, but these things were mostly done by train, car, or plane. But she was not very clear about the specific operations. Since Perwalton knew more about it, she would humbly ask for his advice. While they were talking, the night fell unknowingly. Qi Li and the others had been on the plane for more than 10 hours. So everyone looked at the time and went to bed. Naturally, Zhang Hai went back with Qi Li. Although they had just separated not long ago, as soon as Qi Li returned to the room, she pushed Zhang Hai to the door and kissed him heavily. "Hey, you have been on the plane for more than 10 hours, and there are still a few hours in the car. Aren't you tired?" After their lips parted for a long time, Zhang Hai looked at Qi Li, who still wanted more. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Why does this woman not follow the routine at all? "I'm definitely a little tired, but if I don't enjoy myself with you here, I can't sleep." Licking her lips, Qi Li said with a smile. Then without giving Zhang Hai a chance, she kissed him on the lips again and began to take off her clothes at the same time. Not long after, the two rolled onto Zhang Hai's white jade bed, and the battle began. An hour later, the wind and rain gradually stopped. Zhang Hai also lay on the bed with Qi Li in his arms, letting Qi Li's head rest on his arm. Zhang Hai was also slightly panting, and Qi Li had already closed her eyes. Although she was not asleep yet, her breathing gradually stabilized. "Phew, I really want to stay by your side every day. I'm gradually addicted." Leaning in Zhang Hai's arms, Qi Li whispered. "Then you can stay." Hearing her hand, Zhang Hai's other hand also wrapped around her armpit, pressing one of her breasts and whispering. Feeling Zhang Hai's action, Qi Li couldn't help but pat his hand. Glancing at Zhang Hai, Qi Li closed her eyes again and said bitterly, "If you're not satisfied, then go find Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen. But remember, come back when you go to bed. If I don't see you tomorrow morning, you're dead." Chapter 682. By the way, I don't quite understand. Did they want to come over this time, or did you bring them here? When he heard Qi Li talking about Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen, Zhang Hai couldn't help but ask with some doubts. He had been curious about this matter for a whole day. "I called them here." Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li also replied. "But why?" Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai was even more puzzled. What kind of trick is this? "No reason, I'm willing." However, Qi Li didn't explain her meaning, which made Zhang Hai a little puzzled. "Okay, go quickly, remember to come back and sleep." Looking at Zhang Hai's confused look, Qi Li kicked him, then closed her eyes and began to sleep. She was really tired. Looking at her appearance, Zhang Hai scratched his head, then slowly walked out of the room. After gently closing the door, Zhang Hai was still a little puzzled. He didn't understand why Qili did this, but Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen were also related to him. He couldn't let them wait for too long, so after hesitating, Zhang Hai still went to Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen's room. When he came in, Ai Xiaoxi had just finished bathing, but Feng Yunchen hadn't finished yet. You know, the water in Zhang Hai's room is hot spring water. Soaking more is beneficial for the body, so Feng Yunchen likes to soak more there. Seeing Zhang Hai walk in, Ai Xiaoxi was stunned for a moment, then she didn't care about it. She sat on the bed while drying her hair, and looked at Zhang Hai with a smile. Looking at her, Zhang Hai was a little embarrassed. "Aren't you going to accompany Qili?" At this moment, Ai Xiaoxi asked him with a smile.
She told me to come over and accompany you."
Scratching his head, Zhang Hai said to Ai Xiaoxi, somewhat at a loss. "This Qili is really something." After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi patted the seat beside her for Zhang Hai to sit down. She sighed. This Qili really gave her a lot of pressure. In fact, Zhang Hai didn't understand why Qili called them over. However, Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen thought about it and roughly guessed that Qili was doing this mainly for 3 goals. Firstly, she wanted to signal to Zhang Hai that she was pregnant. She didn't care about what women Zhang Hai had outside, but she wanted Zhang Hai to come back every day. Secondly, she wanted to show Ai Xiaoxi and the others that mistresses should have the awareness of being mistresses because they couldn't help Zhang Hai. Thirdly, and most importantly, she wanted to show Zhang Hai that she was smart. She wanted to tell Zhang Hai that she would be his think tank. This could be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. She had to admit that when it came to playing mind games, Zhang Hai was really far behind Qili. "Forget it, don't think about it anymore. Let me check if you still have the ability to accompany us." Ai Xiaoxi shook her head. She was still too young. Compared to Qili, Ai Xiaoxi felt that she was still lacking a lot. However, this didn't mean that she would admit defeat. Ai Xiaoxi glanced at Zhang Hai and smiled as she leaned on Zhang Hai's legs. She released the part that Zhang Hai had just exercised and gently teased it with her hand before swallowing it. Feeling Ai Xiaoxi's movements, Zhang Hai also closed his eyes and enjoyed it. Sometimes for a man, having more women wasn't a good thing, unless you had a strong body like Zhang Hai. Not long after, the war drums sounded again in the room. The battle between the 2 armies reached its peak once again. Just when Zhang Hai defeated Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yunchen heard the noise outside. After taking a bath, she looked outside and couldn't help but chuckle. Then, she joined the battle. It was already around 11 o'clock in the evening when Zhang Hai left the room. But just as he left the room, he found that Perwalton and Cheryl Lee's doors in the distance were opened. At this time, Cheryl was standing in front of the door, hooking her finger at Zhang Hai. Perwalton was also standing behind her, but his hands were grabbing 2 vital parts of Cheryl's upper body and constantly changing their shape. In fact, the meaning of this was self-evident. Although his feet were already a little light, Zhang Hai couldn't be biased. He gritted his teeth and went into the room. When Zhang Hai appeared in the corridor again, it was already past 12 o'clock. He yawned. To be honest, Zhang Hai was already a little tired. Just as he was about to go back to the room, he suddenly found that in the hall on the 1st floor, someone was holding a phone in a daze. After frowning and looking at it, Zhang Hai found that this person was none other than Zheng Jin. What is she doing so late at night? Scratching his head in confusion, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and went downstairs. "Hello." Just as Zhang Hai hesitated whether to ask what was going on, the phone in Zheng Jin's hand suddenly rang. Then, with Zhang Hai's hearing, a young male voice came from the phone. "Hello, it's me." After hesitating, Zheng Jin said to the man on the phone, "Oh, you still called me? I thought after you went there, you went to play with your black brothers." At this time, the male voice on the phone couldn't help but say a little frivolously. Hearing this, Zheng Jin's expression was not good. "What nonsense are you talking about? I'm here to work." Hearing the voice on the other side, Zheng Jin said with a face full of anger. "Work? Is work more important or am I more important? Shouldn't we be one? Who allowed you to go to work?" Hearing Zheng Jin's words, the man on the other side roared angrily. Hearing his voice, Zheng Jin couldn't help but be speechless. He didn't know what to say. You'd better make a decision yourself. Hearing that Zhang Jin was silent, the person on the other side couldn't help but snort coldly. Then, he directly hung up the phone. As for Zhang Jin, after the other party hung up the phone, he seemed to have lost his soul and was somewhat powerless. Sorry, if you have something important to do, I can arrange for you to return to China as soon as possible. Looking at Zhang Jin sitting there powerlessly in the dark night, Zhang Hai thought for a while, then coughed dryly to remind her of his location, and then said to her. From the call just now, it was not difficult for Zhang Hai to guess that there should be something wrong with Zhang Jin's other half. If because of his own affairs, the other party's relationship was delayed, then Zhang Hai felt that it was a little unnecessary. Oh, it's okay, I'll go back to my room first. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Zhang Jin was stunned for a moment. Then, she turned around and glanced at Zhang Hai. After that, she turned around and walked directly to the second floor and returned to her room without saying anything. She looked like she didn't want to say anything more. Zhang Hai also scratched his head. He had to listen to Qi Li's opinion on this matter. He turned around and returned to his room on the second floor. At this time, Qi Li had already fallen asleep. Zhang Hai also took off his pajamas and went to bed. Just like that, he hugged Qi Li and fell asleep. The next day, Zhang Hai was woken up by Qi Li's hair. When he opened his eyes, he found that Qi Li was lying on top of him at this time, using her hair to sniff his nose. Feeling her movements, Zhang Hai woke up in the morning, and his big brother also woke up. Realizing that her lower body was different, Qi Li's pretty face couldn't help but blush, but she didn't dodge. Looking at her appearance, what else was there to say? The flames of war ignited in the room again. When the flames of war on Zhang Hai's side were extinguished, it was already past 9 in the morning. Are you a dog? Can't you eat enough? Lying on top of Zhang Hai, Qi Li gently patted Zhang Hai's chest and then said softly. At this time, she was sweating all over, and her body seemed to have no bones. She was soft and had no strength at all. Oh, that depends on what you eat. Touching Qi Li's smooth back, Zhang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li buried her head deeper. She liked how Zhang Hai treated her. She really liked it. By the way, what's the matter with Zhang Jin? When I came back last night, I found her on the phone. It seems that the other party is her boyfriend or someone else. Didn't her family allow her to come? Then let her go back. Looking at Qi Li, Zhang Hai remembered Zhang Jin's matter last night, and couldn't help but ask Qi Li. Zhang Hai didn't want to keep a person who didn't have any intention to help him, and he still had to pay her a salary. Sigh, this matter is indeed a little troublesome, but we can't let her go. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but sigh, and then told Zhang Hai. Speaking of which, Zhang Jin was also a bit unlucky. After she graduated from university, she was recruited by Qi Li and worked at the grassroots for a year. Because of Qi Li's relationship, she was directly promoted to the top. Therefore, she wasn't very proficient in some things like interpersonal relationships, but she was indeed good-looking and capable, so there were indeed a lot of people watching her. Not only were the people in the group watching her, but also the people outside. Moreover, they were right next to Qi Li. Originally, Qi Li could also watch a little, but because she spent more energy on Zhang Hai last year, Zhang Jin found a boyfriend without paying attention. This boyfriend was a small boss of their cooperative company, and the two secretly dated for about 3 months. Zhang Jin came over and said that she was pregnant. Originally, this boyfriend didn't want the child, so naturally, he didn't want to marry Zhang Jin. However, because of Qi Li's pressure, and because his parents also thought that Zhang Jin was a good person, and could be considered as an internal staff of Qi Li's, if any news was leaked, it would be a good thing for their family, so they forced this man to marry Zhang Jin. However, after getting married, this guy still went out to drink and have fun. Zhang Jin once went to his party and he beat Zhang Jin up. Moreover, he beat her so badly that she had a miscarriage. After Qi Li found out about this, she directly cut off the cooperation project with their company, which almost made their family bankrupt. This small boss had no choice but to beg Zhang Jin to forgive him, and Zhang Jin was also a fool, so she forgave him just like that. After that, Qi Li kept a close eye on Zhang Jin, but this guy still didn't change his character. On the other hand, Zhang Jin was like a punching bag, completely resigned to her fate. This made Qi Li really angry, So this time, after Zhang Hai said that he wanted to start a company, she transferred Zhang Jin over. She made this decision because she wanted to make Zhang Jin give up and divorce that man. However, now it seemed that Zhang Jin didn't give up so easily. After hearing Qi Li's words, Zhang Hai could only chuckle. Although he thought that he was also a scumbag, he didn't seem to be scumbag to this extent. At the same time, he also felt a little pity for Zhang Jin in his heart, but a person who is pitiful must have something to hate. Thinking of her attitude toward him back then, Zhang Hai's pity instantly disappeared. A wicked person would be dealt with by another wicked person. Now he could only say this. However, just as Qi Li said, Zhang Jin couldn't go back, so Zhang Hai didn't care. Let her stay here. He would see if she could do this job. If she couldn't, then he would find her an idle job. After all, he still had to give face to Qi Li. After talking about Zhang Jin, Zhang Hai and the others also got out of bed. After breakfast, Zhang Hai first took Qi Li and the others to play around in his manor. He also specially went out to sea. The next day, he went to Winthrop, and then went to Boston on the third day. Zhang Hai's company went through the formalities very quickly. After all, Moses Adams was involved. Also because he wanted to buy a plane and so on, Zhang Hai added an additional $100 million to the investment. Anyway, the money wouldn't bear any children in the bank, so it didn't matter if he invested it a little. With the addition of the money, Moses Adams went through the formalities even faster. The license, tax certificate, business permit, and so on were all completed in 3 days. Then, Zhang Hai rented the 17th floor above Moses Adams' lawyer building as the address of his company. Then, it was time to recruit employees, customize a plaque, decorate a company, and so on. At this time, Qi Li completely delegated the power to Zhang Jin. It turned out that Zhang Jin's workability was indeed not bad.
These things were handed over to her in an orderly manner.
Although she was unfamiliar with the place, she had already bought the tables and chairs that afternoon, plus the design, and contacted the construction team. According to her estimate, they could finish the renovation in less than half a month at most. Then they just had to put the tables and chairs, hire employees, and after 3 weeks, they could officially start business. Zhang Hai was very surprised. This girl was really quite efficient. In that case, he just left the matters here to her. At the same time, Zhang Hai also rented an apartment for her in the company. After all, she had to travel around Boston. It would be inconvenient if she didn't have a place to stay. Chapter 683. Hey, your taxes here are too scary. Walking out of the tax bureau, Qi Li naturally held Zhang Hai's arm, and then said unhappily. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also smiled. He couldn't deny it. The taxes in the United States were indeed too heavy. Just the federal tax alone is daunting enough. Fortunately, Zhang Hai earns a lot more than that. Well, the wool comes from the sheep's back. I pay more money, so my status here is higher. Looking at Qi Li's pouting mouth, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Zhang Hai's words were completely correct. The biggest difference between the United States and Huaxia was the difference in social status. In the United States it was a gold standard world. Rich people were everything. If you paid high taxes, you would naturally have a reputation in the local area. After all, the salary of the police was the money you paid in taxes. You, as a taxpayer, were quite a dazzling existence. Even when you accumulated wealth to a certain extent, those in the ruling party or the opposition parties would come to rope you in, hoping to get political donations. Therefore, in the United States, as long as you didn't evade taxes, you would be the guest of honor of all the politicians. No one would dare to do anything to you. Just like Zhang Hai, although his relationship with the upper echelons of the United States was still zero, in Winthrop, he was the local tyrant. Of course, the premise was that he paid all the taxes. In the United States, the most terrifying organization was not the FBI, CIA, etc., but the Tax Bureau. Countless tycoons were imprisoned. The biggest crime was tax evasion. Zhang Hai's identity was Huaxia, so he was particularly careful in this regard. The taxes he paid every year were calculated by 3 accountants hired by Moses Adams. Except for the jewelry he sold, all of his normal income had been declared for tax, even the 1 million yuan from selling the fish. However, even though Zhang Hai was doing well here, if he were in Huaxia, he would still have to tuck his tail between his legs. This was because Hua Xia's social status was based on official status. No matter how much money you had, it was useless. This was because your land belonged to the country. If the country wanted to take it back, it could be taken back. If some officials took a fancy to it and said they wanted to take it back, they could still take it back. At most, they would give you some compensation. However, no one knew how much of this compensation would be left. Moreover, in Hua Xia, being an official was the best way out. No matter how rich a businessman was, he could not withstand a single word from an official. The deputy section chief who destroyed a family and the deputy section chief who exterminated a family was not a joke. Of course, existences above the hall level were not allowed to appear here. Zhang Hai didn't want to be sealed for no reason. Therefore, in the book, the highest rank that appeared was the division level. However, it was still very easy for a division-level official to deal with a billionaire. Well, just take it as easy. Anyway, Zhang Hai did not dare to return to China to develop. He was really afraid that when he woke up, his manner would become someone else's. This was the difference between the official status and the gold standard. The gold standard looked more red and cruel. It was like a pack of wolves. If you want to survive, you have to find food and eat other animals. When you become the strongest wolf in the pack, you will be the wolf king. The official status was like an official who was herding a flock of sheep. In his eyes, these sheep were treated equally. If he liked any of them, he would help them. However, they were still a flock of sheep. For the rich, the gold standard was much better than the official standard. At least they could ensure their own safety. However, for the ordinary people, the official standard was actually more conducive to governance. It was more stable, and there would be fewer conflicts in society. This was what it meant to not worry about scarcity, but about inequality. Well, Zhang Hai was a little off topic. However, now he was relieved because the biggest issue of the year was solved. Unknowingly, Qili had been with Zhang Hai for almost half a month. During this time, Zhang Hai and the others had been busy building the company, preparing the beef cattle to participate in the Texas All-American Beef Cattle Show, and dealing with the matters in the manner Zheng Jin, who was recommended by Qili, was really good. She had learned a lot after being with Qili for so many years. Her fluent English made it easy for her to live here. In addition, with Zhang Hai's influence in Boston, at least Zhang Dihai and Moses Adams would definitely take care of her. Under such circumstances, Zhang Jin's efficiency was really high. It was as if the things in China didn't affect her. She set up the company, renovated the company, bought tables and chairs, met the employees, and so on. It could be said that Zheng Jin easily arranged these tasks in an orderly manner. After watching her for a week, he found that she was really good at this. Zhang Hai signed a contract with her. Zhang Hai hired her to be the CEO of the Tanglong company. There were only two main categories of work: publicity and transportation. Publicity of the beef and seafood produced in Zhang Hai's Tanglong manor. Transportation was responsible for passing these things through security and transporting them back to the capital of Hua Xia to be handed over to Qili. She could also send them to the big cities in the United States, where there would naturally be people from the Shanghai supermarkets to receive them. She mainly paid for things like planes, flight routes, and maintenance. She handled these quite well. As for her salary, Zhang Hai gave her $1 million a year. Although it wasn't particularly much, one could become a general manager in some domestic companies. $1 million a year was actually just a basic figure. After all, it was only $6 million, and they had to pay taxes. But what was really valuable was the 10% dividend and the company's shares. Zhang Hai owned 100% of the company's shares, but she could enjoy 10% of the dividend. This was also her goal. According to her estimation, if the company did well, it was impossible for it to lose money. After all, most of the business had already been contracted out. So even if it didn't make money in a year, it would at least make a net profit of $30 to $40 million. 10% was $3 to $4 million. This was not a small sum for Zheng Jin. Whether it was for money or for Qili, she was quite serious about her work. Except for an accountant, Zhang Hai was too lazy to take care of everything else. In Zhang Hai's eyes, she was a complete professional. After handing over the company to Zheng Jin, Zhang Hai and the others put more effort into the manor. This half a month might be the happiest half a month for Qili since her father passed away. Because Zhang Hai would hug her to sleep every night. Although he would leave for a while at night, when she fell asleep, Zhang Hai was by her side. When she woke up, Zhang Hai was also by her side. Without the pressure of work, she played with Zhang Hai in the manor every day. They would go to see the cows, ride horses, plant vegetables in the greenhouse that had been built with Delina and the others, or go to the vineyard to talk to Aphrodite and the others about the ripening of the grapes. Then, they would drink a glass of wine under the grapevines. If she was tired of playing on land, she could play in the sea. She could go fishing, catch fish, dive and catch lobsters. She could also ask Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen, who were almost mute here, to go shopping in Winthrop. To be honest, Qili really didn't want to leave anymore. She wanted to buy some native products or check out the seasonal clothes. But a phone call pulled her out of this idea. She could stay here, but she couldn't watch her father's company collapse or fall into the hands of others. This was the last thing she wanted to see. Because of this, after Qili accompanied Zhang Hai to pay his taxes, it was almost time for her to leave. But this time, Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen wouldn't leave. This time, they were already mentally prepared to stay by Zhang Hai's side. If Qi Jie and Qi Ye came back, then there would be 7 people in Zhang Hai's villa. It seemed to be getting more and more lively. Recently, they had been learning English from Delina and Marian. Seeing their changes, Zhang Hai was also very happy. Time sometimes passed by unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, Qili had been in Zhang Hai's villa for 3 weeks. And today, she was officially leaving. But when she came, there were 4 people, but when she left, she was the only one left. Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen decided to stay in Zhang Hai's villa. They didn't want to go back, but at least they didn't want to leave now. Zheng Jin had become Zhang Hai's CEO and signed a 1-year work contract. The visa was also easily completed with the help of Zhang Hai. So this time, she didn't want to leave. Qili also didn't want her to leave. After all, it was very troublesome to stay in China. You have to take care of yourself. Outside the departure hall of New York's Xueqi Airport, Zhang Hai and Qili stood opposite each other. Looking at Zhang Hai in front of her, Qili said with some worry. She didn't know when her heart had been completely tied to Zhang Hai. Looking at Qili, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment before saying, "You too, if you feel anything wrong, contact me immediately. I can go back to China or pick you up. Don't forget, I am still your husband." Looking at Qili, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment before saying, "Heh, you still know that you are my husband, but unfortunately, my husband is a womanizer. I think you have eaten almost all of the women in your manor. In the beginning, you lied to me that you didn't have that kind of feeling for Aphrodite and the others. A rabbit doesn't eat the grass near its burrow. I think you have eaten all of them now." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, although Qili's face showed a trace of displeasure, her heart was already blooming with joy. Husband, these 2 words, from Zhang Hai's mouth, it was really not an easy thing. But she still had to accept it and say what she should say. She didn't know how she could tolerate Zhang Hai having so many women. Maybe it was to make up for it, or for something else, but Qili found that she really didn't care about these things. Compared to those women, she was more concerned about whether she could stay by Zhang Hai's side. This was more important. "I'm leaving. Don't miss me too much." Seeing that the plane had begun to check in, Qili knew that she had to leave. She glanced at Zhang Hai, took a deep breath, and then hugged Zhang Hai tightly. After kissing Zhang Hai's lips, she said in his ear. Then she picked up her luggage and left quickly. She didn't look back because she didn't know if she would be willing to leave if she looked back at Zhang Hai. Her life here with Zhang Hai and the people here with Zhang Hai were constantly destroying her strong woman side. She didn't know if she would have the ability to go back to the capital and be her own iron-blooded president after one look back. But in Qili's heart, a seed had been planted. It seemed that it was time for her to consider retirement. Once she found a trustworthy person and handed the company over to him, she would be able to look for Zhang Hai. This was a good thing. As he watched Qili's figure enter the airport, Zhang Hai's heart felt a little empty. In fact, even though Zhang Hai was living a good life here, he was actually a little lonely. He didn't lack friends. Everyone in Winthrop was his friend, but when these friends were linked to benefits, friendship was no longer as pure. Of course, this was only because Zhang Hai was busy. Zhang Hai didn't lack women either. Just like Qili said, Aphrodite and the others were indeed related to Zhang Hai. But their relationship was more of a superior and subordinate relationship, not like an equal boyfriend and girlfriend relationship. Ai Xiaoxi couldn't give him this, Feng Yunchen couldn't give him this, Perwalton couldn't give him this, and even Qi Jia and Qi Ye couldn't give him the same feeling as Qi Li. Qi Li was Qi Li, Qi Jia was Qi Jia, Qi Ye was Qi Ye, and Ai Xiaoxi was Ai Xiaoxi. Every woman by Zhang Hai's side was unique and irreplaceable. If anyone left, he would feel a little empty in his heart. I'm still not strong enough. Sooner or later, I'll have all my women by my side. Since I have the ability, if I don't start a harem, won't my efforts be in vain? With a self-deprecating smile, Zhang Hai, who had always thought of himself as a salted fish with no dreams, had his first dream sprouted because of Qi Li. It could also be said that it was an ambition. Although this ambition was not serious, it was more or less considered a main line. After sorting out his emotions, Zhang Hai drove back to the manor. The next day, he had to go to Boston. After Qi Li left, Qi Jia and Qi Ye would be coming back. They had already settled the matters in Miami. The huge White Research Institute had been sold by Qi Jia. Anyway, Qi Ye's illness had been completely cured, and they would officially return tomorrow. However, Zhang Hai couldn't stay with them for too long because he had to leave soon. This time, his target was Texas. Chapter 684. Sir? Sir. The plane will land in half an hour. Please hurry up. In a dual-use plane, a pretty stewardess stood outside the bathroom door with a blushing face. She knocked on the door while speaking to the person inside. Perhaps the stewardess heard her voice. After a few minutes, the bathroom door opened. Zhang Hai walked out of the room with Cheryl Li, who could no longer stand on her own. Under the shy gaze of the stewardess, he walked back to his seat and put Cheryl next to him. After fastening her seat belt, Cheryl leaned on Zhang Hai's shoulder as usual. She allowed Zhang Hai's hand to reach into her clothes and change certain parts of her body into various shapes. Hey, we're still on the plane. Can you be more careful? Looking at Zhang Hai and Cheryl Li sitting next to her, Perwalton put down the fashion magazine in her hand and said impatiently, "It's really interesting in the sky. I haven't tried it before. Shall we try it too?" Hearing Perwalton's words, Zhang Hai smiled, stretched out his long arm, and pulled Perwalton into his arms. His hand had unknowingly touched her lower abdomen and reached into her clothes. After struggling for a while, she realized that she couldn't break free. Perwalton gave up and let Zhang Hai's big hand reach into her pants. Feeling that her clothes were completely wet, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. However, Perwalton didn't feel embarrassed at all. Instead, she continued to read the magazine. "I won't go with you. If you want to go, let's talk about it after we get off the plane." Ignoring Zhang Hai's gaze and actions, Perwalton said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. This woman is really cute. Sister Perwalton has been afraid of heights since the past. She is also afraid of flying. I've known her for so many years, and she never unfastens her seat belt on the plane. Listening to Perwalton's words, Cheryl Li whispered in Zhang Hai's ear. Playing in the air was actually proposed by her because they watched a movie about stewardesses in Zhang Hai's house a while ago. She felt that it might be good to play in the air, so she tried it today. Unexpectedly, in that narrow bathroom, there was indeed an indescribable feeling. There was no way to stretch out their body, and they couldn't even take off their clothes. They could only pull their underwear to the side, but it was a different feeling. Of course, the premise was that there was no one else on the plane. They took off from Boston to San Antonio. In just a few hours, they went to the bathroom 3 times, which showed how addicted they were. Perwalton had been sitting there reading a magazine. But looking at the magazine that she hadn't finished for a few hours, one could tell that her heart wasn't that calm. Glancing at Zhang Hai and Cheryl, Perwalton wrinkled her nose at them. When they landed on the ground, she will definitely let Zhang Hai, maybe let Zhang Hai know why the flowers are so red. After all, Zhang Hai is indeed talented in that aspect. However, it's not a problem to let Cheryl know the consequences of offending her. As the 3 of them chatted, laughed, and hugged each other, the plane was about to land at San Antonio's airport. Today was April 3rd. There were still 3 days before the Texas All-American Beef Show, but the venue was already set up. After getting the exact information, Perwalton used the plane dedicated to Sam's Club to take Zhang Hai and his cattle to Texas. This plane was a huge plane, an Airbus A380. The whole plane was changed into two parts, the cargo cabin and the cabin. There were only 10 seats in the cabin, and all of them were better than the first-class seats. The seats could be adjusted 180 degrees and could be used as a bed directly. Moreover, it was very wide, and the seats could be moved left and right. In addition to the decoration here, it was very luxurious. To be honest, Zhang Hai had some thoughts of buying such a plane. If he took such a plane back to China, it would be very comfortable. But the premise was that the money he spent was also very comfortable. Although the cargo cabin at the back was called a cargo cabin, it was actually not bad. At least the seats were comparable to those in the first-class cabin. This time, Zhang Hai came to participate in the competition to make a name for himself, not to open up a market. Therefore, he learned a lesson from last time and only brought 3 cows this time. However, these 3 cows were all carefully raised by him this month. These 3 cows were all left over from last year. They were fat and strong, and full of spirituality. Of course, this so-called spirituality was not related to intelligence. It's just that these cows look very smart, that's all. As for the 3 cows, Zhang Hai also brought 3 cowboys with him. They were Robbins Garcia, Burke Dollar, and Belle Lester. Originally, Philemon Turner should have come, but considering Zhang Hai's safety outside, he specially sent Belle Lester this time. Of course, there was also a professional bodyguard, Knerson Peters. Athena Vesborio did not come, because the manor still needed to be protected. At this time, the 4 big men were sitting in the cargo cabin. As for the passenger cabin, only Zhang Hai and the other 2 were there. Naturally, Zhang Hai could do whatever he wanted, and these 2 would cooperate with him very well. As the tires came into contact with the ground, the huge plane couldn't help but shake. Robbins Garcia and the rest who were already prepared waited for the plane to slowly stabilize before they immediately walked into the cow enclosure to calm the cows who were a little panicked due to the tremors. The good thing about cows was that they were very quick to calm down. Soon, the 3 cows calmed down. Zhang Hai and the others also got off the plane. The airport had already prepared a car for the cows, which was parked behind the plane. Zhang Hai and the others also got off the plane. After helping to put the cows into the car, they left the airport through the cargo passage. Zhang Hai and the others also left in the car prepared by Perwalton. Their goal was the venue this time. Although they could stay in a better hotel, don't forget that Zhang Hai had to stay with the cows. Perwalton and Cheryl had to stay with Zhang Hai. If they came to San Antonio, they would have a chance to be alone with Zhang Hai. If they went to another hotel to stay, it would be a waste, especially since Perwalton had tortured her along the way. When they arrived at the venue, Zhang Hai and the others showed their registration information. Then the people here arranged a place for them to graze the cows and an exhibition hall. After that, Zhang Hai and the others went to a hotel prepared by the organizers. Although it was only a 4-star hotel, it was still very good. Zhang Hai spent a lot of money, so the location of his exhibition hall was good. The room he stayed in was also a suite. After entering the room with Perwalton and Cheryl, Perwalton pushed Zhang Hai onto the bed. It was obvious what they wanted to do. It was afternoon when they arrived, but when Zhang Hai and the others came out, it was already night. According to Zhang Hai, they were going to find something to eat, but Robbins Garcia and the others were unwilling to leave. After all, the exhibition was coming soon. The cows were also very important, so only 4 people went out in the end. Zhang Hai, Perwalton, Cheryl Lee, and Zhang Hai's bodyguard, Knerson Peters. It was easy for the 4 of them to go out. Zhang Hai rented an SUV and drove to the distant holy city, San Antonio. In fact, for people in China, there had always been a misunderstanding about San Antonio. It was mainly for the NBA. This was because people in the NBA always said that San Antonio was a small city. The basketball market was small, and there was no economy. In the eyes of people in China, San Antonio might not be as big as Boston, Atlanta, or Oakland. But in fact, this was all nonsense. San Antonio was a big city in the United States. It was quite a big city. Texas was the largest state in the United States besides Alaska. The largest city in Texas, Houston, was the 4th largest city in the United States. As for the holy city, San Antonio, it was the 2nd largest city in Texas and the 7th largest city in the United States. Other than New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston, San Antonio was actually not afraid of anyone. Philadelphia, the sixth largest city, and Phoenix, the fifth largest city, were actually on par with San Antonio. Boston? If it was a metropolitan area, then San Antonio was far behind. However, they were talking about cities, and they were using cities as a unit. Boston's urban area alone was not comparable at all. San Antonio's history could be said to be very long. It was the earliest Native American settlement in the United States. In 1691, Spanish explorers settled here. In the middle of the 18th century, it developed into the largest Native American settlement in Texas. In the middle of the 19th century, Texas and Mexico fought, including the Battle of the Alamo. At that time, the fight was very tragic. Mexico was very strong at that time. Texas was defeated, but later the Americans stood up. After Wu took over the territory of Texas, the Mexican-American War started. The United States annexed Texas, and then there was the Civil War. This place became a famous cattle trading center and border city in the United States. To be honest, this city had a long history, but there were not many places that attracted people. There were only two reasons. One was the architecture of the Japanese people. After all, it was occupied by the Spanish in the beginning, so a large number of Spanish-style buildings were preserved. Later, it was occupied by Mexico, and many Mexican buildings were preserved here. There were very few American buildings here. However, there were many such exotic buildings. Second, the Holy River, which the people of San Antonio were proud of. The banks of the river were green and could be said to be world famous. Around the river, there were restaurants, hotels, cafes, tourist souvenir shops, theaters, museums, and other buildings. However, all the buildings mentioned above were located in the river valley, which was lower than the city's street level. In other words, looking from the city, one could only see the river valley full of trees, but there were no traces of people. It was quite spectacular, and it gave people a strange feeling when they walked in.
Besides these two things, there was nothing else to see.
Second, the recruitment mainly depended on the humanities. The Texas Folk Festival, beef show, rodeo competition, and so on. Every year, the San Antonio Livestock Show and rodeo competition were held here, but it was in February and lasted for 3 consecutive weeks. In February, Jiang Hai was at home, so naturally, he could not come. This time, Jiang Hai participated in the livestock show held in Texas. Compared to the one held in San Antonio, the one in Texas was more popular. It was open to the whole country and lasted for a week. There were 2 kinds of competitions, the cattle competition and the rodeo competition. Both competitions started on the first day, then went through 3 days of auditions. On the 4th day, the top 16 were decided. On the 5th day, the top 8 were decided. On the 6th day, the top 4 were decided. On the 7th day, the best cattle and the best rodeo were decided. Compared to the voting in New York, a team of experts was formed here. They went into the exhibition hall to look at the cattle and score them. Therefore, there was no need to set up a TV and hang ribbons like in New York. It was very troublesome. Jiang Hai and the others came here mainly to get cattle. They did not care too much about rodeo. Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar came here to compete when they were young. They had won honors, so they could not participate again. As for Bell Lester, it was not that the 2 old guys wanted to criticize him, but with his current ability, it was impossible for him to pass the auditions in such a competition. One was from Texas, and the other was from Montana. The rodeos in these 2 places relied on these things to make a living. Therefore, when it came to picking up sheep, riding cattle, training horses, and so on, Bell Lester was at least 10 times better. Therefore, from the beginning, Jiang Hai's goal was the beef show, not the rodeo competition. Of course, it was still a bit early to say this. After all, they had to wait 3 days. Jiang Hai, Perwalton, Cheryl Lee, and Knerson Peters went straight into the city of San Antonio. Chapter 685. Hi boss. Give us 4 steaks. Hurry up. The game is about to start. We still have to drive there. The 4 people who walked in were probably 4 fans. They didn't look very old. They were about 30 years old. They were wearing the Spurs black jerseys. They shouted loudly as they walked in. Zhang Hai looked at them when he heard their shouts. The four of them walked to a table and began to discuss tonight's match. Is there a Spurs game tonight? Zhang Hai didn't pay much attention to NBA games. Although he would watch it sometimes, most of the time, he preferred to watch American TV series and variety shows. For example, there was a famous American TV series called Slave of Desire and another one called Spartacus. They were all very good American TV series. There were no scenes that went against the socialist ideology. They were American TV series that anyone, from 99 years old to people who had just learned how to walk, could watch. Moreover, they were filmed quite well. However, he used to like basketball, so when he saw these people talking about the Spurs, Zhang Hai's interest was piqued. Of course, boss. Tonight is the regular season game between the Spurs and the Raptors. San Antonio will win. A white man turned his head and looked at Zhang Hai. He might have heard Zhang Hai's words. After hearing his words, many people in the restaurant started shouting. It could be seen that the Spurs had an unusually high reputation in the local area. Actually, this was understandable. Ever since the Spurs were established, they had won a total of 5 championships. Especially after 1998, they had never disappointed anyone. After choosing Duncan, they won the championship in 1999. In 2003, they defeated the Lakers, who were at their peak, and won the championship. In 2005, they defeated the Pistons, who had just eliminated the Lakers' F4 powerhouse, and in 2007, they defeated LeBron James, who was at his peak. After that, they entered the playoffs every year, and slowly changed. In 2013 and 2014, they entered the finals in a row, and with a bunch of old arms and legs, they defeated the Big Three Miami Heat. At the same time, they were now one of the top teams in the league. When Zhang Hai first started watching basketball, it was because of Yao Ming of the Rockets. Later, his favorite team was the Phoenix Suns. The way the Suns played was very popular. However, during the 2 years when the Suns were at their peak, they were defeated by the Spurs. At that time, Zhang Hai didn't like the Spurs. He felt that the Spurs were a boring team. After pinning the other team to the ground, they didn't let the other team fight back. It was very difficult for him to like the Spurs. However, in recent years, Zhang Hai had become a fan of the Spurs. That smooth attack, that valiant fighting style, was indeed very likable, and so was Zhang Hai. Usually, he would just watch the Spurs play at home. Now that he was in San Antonio, he wanted to go and watch the game live. Therefore, he looked at Prawalton and Cheryl Lee. He wanted to ask for their opinions. Although I don't know much, if you want to go, we'll go. After looking at each other, Cheryl's gaze landed on Prawalton. Her meaning was to let Prawalton do as she pleased. Prawalton thought for a while. Indeed, other than going back to roll in the sheets, she didn't have any other activities at night. She had just done it in the afternoon and was still in a happy state. If Zhang Hai wanted to go and watch, then she would accompany him. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but cheer softly. Then, he took out his phone and prepared to buy tickets. The Spurs had a lot of fans, and they were all die-hard fans. The team's results were good and they entered the playoffs every year. Therefore, the loss of fans was relatively small. In addition, the team's playing style had become more and more beautiful in recent years, so the number of fans had increased. However, the football market here wasn't particularly popular. Other than key games and the playoffs, it was difficult to fill the seats with fans. Basically, it wasn't too difficult to buy tickets at any time. It was just a matter of location. Zhang Hai wanted to buy tickets in the front row, so he naturally didn't choose to sit too far behind. Therefore, he chose to sit in the first row, not far behind the Spurs bench. Naturally, the tickets weren't cheap at such a close position. The Spurs' results were there for all to see. His tickets couldn't be as cheap as those of the Bucks. After buying 4 tickets next to each other, Zhang Hai and the others sped up their eating. After eating, they prepared to leave directly. However, just as they were about to leave the shop, a group of people walked in from outside. Compared to the group of fans just now, these people were obviously the so-called successful people. They were all wearing suits and ties. The person in front kept smiling as he led the way. As he walked, he introduced the riverside. Originally, the two sides didn't know each other, so it was fine if they just walked past each other. However, the problem was that the entrance of the shop wasn't very big. The large group of people didn't seem to have any intention of lining up. They just squeezed their way in. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai, who was originally very anxious, couldn't help but frown. However, he didn't say anything. After all, this wasn't Winthrop. It wasn't his territory. For a small matter like this, it would be fine if he just let it pass. It would show that he was a person of high standards. However, if things were to pass so easily, there wouldn't be a need to describe it in detail. Among the crowd, most people's eyes were originally focused on this shop, but some people's eyes were looking at something else. For example, Cheryl Lee and Prawalton beside Zhang Hai. Ordinary men naturally have evil intentions but don't have the guts to do it. After all, they have male companions beside them. However, some people didn't care about this. So a well-dressed white man who looked about 30 years old came over with a smile. He wanted to walk in front of Prawalton, but Zhang Hai wouldn't give him such a chance. He directly blocked in front of Prawalton and Cheryl Lee. The man couldn't help but frown. However, he still didn't stop. He glanced at Zhang Hai's physique and smiled disdainfully. He was about to push Zhang Hai away. But the moment their shoulders collided, the man's face couldn't help but change. He really didn't expect Zhang Hai's strength to be so strong. Under this collision, he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder, and then his body unconsciously turned back.
Why did you bump into me?
This man really knows how to complain first. After being pushed away, he instantly covered his shoulder and looked at Zhang Hai angrily and shouted loudly. Hearing his words, the people who originally walked in were stunned for a moment, then walked to the man's side. Seeing the crowd gathering, Zhang Hai chuckled. Want to fight? He wasn't afraid of anyone when he fought. However, just as Zhang Hai was about to warm up, Connerson Peters stood up and came in front of them. Step back, don't come close. At the sight of Connerson's powerful figure, those people who had gathered around were all startled. After exchanging glances with each other, they all took a step back. Actually, their relationship was not as solid as they had imagined. They just needed to support each other. However, there was no need for them to confront this burly man head-on. Given his size, it was obviously not a good idea to find trouble with him. Hey, you're not allowed to make trouble here. Otherwise, I'll call the police. At this time, the owner of this restaurant, or rather the waiter, also came over, but he didn't mean to stir up trouble. Generally, when there was a conflict in China, the owner would come out to stop the fight and say something like, "We're all here to have fun. You don't have to do this." Or, "Give me some face, don't start a conflict here. Everyone put out the fire." But the American owner was arrogant. If he didn't agree with a word, he would call the police. He wasn't afraid that these people would really fight. Hearing this person's words, the people here pretended to be angry and then completely retreated. What a joke. They didn't intend to fight. What a joke. If they were injured, it would be too much of a loss. And although the man didn't seem to be dressed well, he was obviously someone who didn't lack money since he could go out with a bodyguard. What's the matter? Zhang Hai, why are you here? Seeing that the crowd had retreated, a person who came in first ran into the circle, wanting to be a peacemaker. But when he just walked in and saw Zhang Hai in front of him, he couldn't help but be stunned. When Zhang Hai saw him, he was also a little surprised, because he knew this person. Rosalind Cartwright, one of Zhang Hai's competitors last year. He came from the Cartwright Animal Husbandry Company. In the beginning, a man named Paul K. went to Zhang Hai's manor to pull cattle, and there was some hatred between the two sides. Later, at the beef show in New York State, this guy made a bet with Zhang Hai. As a result, he was beaten black and blue by Zhang Hai. If it was normal times, Zhang Hai probably wouldn't remember him, but it was different here. Zhang Hai just said that he was going to attend the beef show and just remembered him. He didn't expect to meet him here. It was really fate. Why are you here? Has your position been restored? Looking at Rosalind Carlett, who was walking in front of him, Zhang Hai crossed his arms and said disdainfully. He clearly remembered that after this guy lost to him last year, he was directly fired by his family's company. Now it seems that he is worthy of being his son. In just a year, he has been restored to his position. Ahem, you don't need to worry about that. What? The New York beef show can't satisfy you anymore. So now you're eyeing the national beef show? Let me tell you, The National Beef Show is not as easy as the New York Beef Show. There are more strong people here than you think. Hearing Zhang Hai mention last year's incident, Rosalind Cartwright's face couldn't help but change, and he said gloomily. He thought about it and figured out the purpose of Zhang Hai's coming here. It was nothing more than the same as his, to attend the National Beef Show. Thinking of this, his gloomy face became even gloomier. Originally, the Cartwright Company's business didn't cover the territory outside the northeast corner of the United States, so they didn't care about the National Beef Show. First, they couldn't beat it. Second, it was because the beef that they carefully prepared might not be able to cover the market after the competition. At that time, it would be a waste. In addition, the competition here was too fierce. Therefore, in their opinion, it was better to take over the New York Beef Show than to waste time on the National Beef Show in Texas. But who would have thought that Zhang Hai would come out last year and completely ruin their wishful thinking? The reason why he didn't attend the New York Beef Show this year, but came to Texas to attend the livestock show in Texas, was to avoid meeting Zhang Hai again. But he didn't expect to meet Zhang Hai here. Needless to say, he knew what he was here for. It must be for the National Beef Show. Thinking of Zhang Hai's beef, he couldn't help but have a headache. This time it might be really troublesome. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai shrugged. He was quite confident in his beef. I hope you can get a good result. Let's go. Glancing at Zhang Hai's indifferent look, Rosalind Cartwright took a deep breath and left with the others. Seeing them leave, Zhang Hai and the others also left. They still had to watch the competition. Do you know this group of people? That girl seems pretty good. After Zhang Hai and the others left, the person who had the conflict just now couldn't help but walk over, covering his shoulder. He looked at Rosalind Cartwright and said, "Don't give up. Just give up. That guy. Well, it's nothing. That guy raises cattle in Boston, Massachusetts. He's a small manor owner. The quality of the beef he raises is pretty good. He's probably here to participate in this event." After hearing this person's words, Rosalind wanted to tell him to give up. Zhang Hai was very powerful in Massachusetts, and he had a lot of personal property. If something happened to him, he would be finished. But when he was about to say it, he suddenly changed his mind. If this guy wants to find trouble with Zhang Hai, then let him go. If he succeeds, then Zhang Hai's trip will be in vain. If he can't find her, then Zhang Hai will deal with him. It has nothing to do with him, and he will have one less competitor. Why not? Hearing Rosalind Cartwright's words, the man couldn't help but touch his chin. This guy was a pervert. When he saw Pro Walton, it was impossible for him not to be tempted. Although she was taken, he could use her to loosen the soil. As for Zhang Hai, he didn't care at all. He was just a manor owner. How much money could he have? What power could he have? Just give him some channels, and he would be happy. Thinking of this guy was even more certain that he wanted that beauty. Chapter 686. Do you have a grudge against the Cartwright Company? Pro Walton, who was lying on Zhang Hai's chest, forced herself to calm down. She asked Zhang Hai with her eyes half closed. Zhang Hai hugged her with one hand and Cheryl Lee with the other. He took 2 deep breaths to stabilize his unstable breathing. Then he began to recall. Let's talk about this. Cartwright. The Cartwright Company is a big company in the Cartwright Company. Back then, my cowboys wanted to sell their cattle to this company. Actually, you can't blame them because they didn't know how much my cattle were worth. The people sent by this company were very arrogant. At that time, I made a bet with them to see if I could get first place in the New York State Livestock Exhibition. You know the result. Because of this bet, the company lost a lot of money. So we have a grudge. Zhang Hai smiled as he looked at Pro Walton. Oh, is that so? This is a normal competition. Don't worry about them. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Pro Walton closed her eyes and found a comfortable position on Zhang Hai's shoulder like a kitten. Then, she leaned against him and got ready to sleep. Zhang Hai also got ready to sleep with them in his arms. After leaving the restaurant, Zhang Hai didn't know what those people said. He went to the Spurs home stadium and watched the Spurs games. He had to admit that the current Spurs were indeed one of the strongest teams in the league. Even the Fierce Dragons, one of the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, were beaten by them. However, looking at the current Spurs, Zhang Hai still felt that there was a problem. That was because the Spurs lacked a true offensive all-star in their current lineup. In other words, no matter how tight the opponent's defense was, he could still score. In the past, Duncan was such a person. No matter who was guarding against him, there was no way to deal with him. However, things were different now. Aldridge's offense as the core of the two Dirks was not very stable. His shooting ability was still quite good against the short players inside the three-point line, but against those muscle-bound players, his offensive ability was indeed a little weak. He was not bad at playing the fourth position, but he was still a little lacking at the fifth position. Small forward Xueqi Leonard's defense was one of the best in the league, but his offense, especially when it came to attacking with the ball, was still far from good. His hit rate for a back solo was also not particularly high, and there was still room for improvement. From Zhang Hai's perspective as a fake fan, the Spurs were a strong team. However, they were not at the level of a champion. However, this had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. After watching the game, they returned to the hotel. Of course, after returning, Connors and Peters went to eat some supper before returning to rest together. After returning to the room, Zhang Hai, Walton, and Cheryl Lee naturally had another meal. Fortunately, Zhang Hai was not an ordinary person. If he was, he would have been done for a long time. Sometimes, Zhang Hai thought that monogamy was not only a matter of women's rights, but also to protect men and let them live a little longer. Hugging Walton and Cheryl Lee, Zhang Hai slowly fell asleep. The hotel was originally built in the suburbs, and it was a 4-star hotel. The soundproofing was very good. There was no other sound throughout the night, and Zhang Hai and the others had a good night's sleep. The next morning, they came out of the room at 9 o'clock. After washing up, they went to the hotel lobby to have breakfast. Breakfast here was included in the accommodation. Although the organizers provided accommodation, they did not provide lunch, dinner, or supper. Only breakfast was eaten as a buffet. In fact, it was called a buffet, but there was a lot of food. There were sandwiches, baked bread, and a lot of other ingredients. You could take whatever you wanted. There was fresh milk, fried eggs, sausages, ham, bacon, and fresh lettuce, kale, and other vegetables. In addition to Western food, there were also Chinese food, such as various kinds of rice porridge, soy milk, Mexican burritos, and so on. It could be said that this hotel prepared breakfast for people all over the world. As long as you wanted to eat, there was food here. Among Zhang Hai's group of 6, Robbins Garcia got up very early and went straight to the cowshed. After all, there wasn't much time left until the start of the competition. Therefore, the cowshed couldn't be left unguarded. In case someone was up to no good, or if there was an accident, they wouldn't have enough time to transfer more beef cattle from the manor. Therefore, there must be someone guarding the cowshed, even at night. Last night, it was Burke Dollar for the first half of the night, and Bell Lester for the second half. This morning, Robbins Garcia went to replace him. Therefore, when Zhang Hai and the others arrived at the restaurant, they found that there were a lot of people eating breakfast. Most of them were dressed in standard cowboy attire. At the same time, there were also some who wore suits and ties. These were the representatives or bosses of the livestock companies. Looking at these people, Zhang Hai didn't care about them. He found an empty seat and let Walton and Cheryl Lee occupy it. Then Zhang Hai and the others went to get food. However, when he just came back with food, the scene in front of him made Zhang Hai laugh. It's really melodramatic. Looking at his table in the distance, Zhang Hai lowered his head and smiled. Boss, do you need me to send them away? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Connors and Peters also noticed the distance. He walked to Zhang Hai's side and whispered to Zhang Hai. Looking at the fierce light in his eyes, Zhang Hai waved his hand and stopped him. Let's take a look first. After Zhang Hai finished speaking, he walked back to his table with the food, but at this time, there was a guy sitting next to Walton. Zhang Hai also saw this guy last night. It was the guy who bumped into him. At this time, this man was sitting next to Walton, talking about something, but Walton's face was still cold. Except for Zhang Hai, she has always had this expression towards other men, but this person didn't seem to care. Hey, you are sitting in the wrong place. Putting the food on the table, Zhang Hai pointed to the man's position and said with narrowed eyes. But the man just glanced at Zhang Hai, then turned his head and continued to talk nonsense.
For example, he has a manor in Montana, how beautiful it is. He has a villa in California, next to the sea. He also has a yacht he can sail per Walton and so on.
Listening to him talking nonsense, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Oh, sorry, it seems that this gentleman is deaf. Let's go somewhere else. Zhang Hai looked at the man, shrugged, picked up the food and winked at Per Walton. Everyone was about to leave.
Seeing that the beauty in front of him was about to leave, the man had no choice but to ignore Zhang Hai.
He turned around and looked at Zhang Hai arrogantly. Are you blind? Can't you see that I am chatting with this lady? If you are blind, I suggest you go to the ophthalmology department. Don't do these disgusting things.
Looking at Zhang Hai, the man turned his butt and said slowly, This gentleman doesn't seem to be deaf. Then it seems that there is something wrong with your brain.
Didn't you hear me say that there is someone here? Staring at the person in front of him, Zhang Hai also smiled. He looked at him with disdain and said, This guy really thinks he's something. Is this seat yours? Do you think there is someone here just because you say so? I also said that this place is mine. Boy, you better watch your mouth. A nouveau riche from Boston dares to pretend in our Texas. Believe it or not, you won't be able to walk out of Texas in one piece. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man smiled disdainfully, then looked at Zhang Hai with an arrogant face. I said, the place I hate the most is Texas. There are too many dogs here, and they don't understand human language. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai was not angry, but looked at Per Walton, waved at her, and then said with a smile. Now that the dog is barking at you, what are you going to do? Hearing what Zhang Hai said, Per Walton couldn't help but pick up a piece of bread with a smile, tore off a piece and put it in her mouth and chewed gently, while chuckling at Zhang Hai. You dare to call me a dog? Listening to Zhang Hai and Per Walton echoing each other, the man's eyes widened and he said with an angry face. Unfortunately, Zhang Hai and Per Walton ignored him. I'm a dog lover. If a dog barks at me, I should kill it, but today I'm in a good mood, so I'm just going to drive it away. With his head lowered, Zhang Hai said softly, and when his voice fell, his hand also put on the man's shoulder. You want to? Feeling Zhang Hai's action, the man couldn't help but panic a little. He knew that Zhang Hai's physical fitness was not comparable to his, so he wanted to say something, but before he finished speaking, Zhang Hai's right arm instantly exerted force. He directly threw the man out, yes, threw him out. He flew directly from the chair, almost 2 meters high, and fell heavily on the carpet in the distance. Then Zhang Hai slowly sat down in front of him. Ah, my arm. My arm. My arm. You bastard. You bastard. My arm, it hurts, you bastard. How dare you hit me, security? Where are the security guards? If I get hit, there won't be anyone, you bastard. Who the F***CK, eat. This fall, although it wouldn't hurt him, it was inevitable that it would hurt. When he landed, the man hit his body with his hand, which made his arm hurt, but he still had a lot of energy. After he stood up with his arm, he shouted loudly. Hearing his shout, many security guards in the distance rushed over. Looking at his appearance, plus Zhang Hai's appearance, it was not difficult to see that this should be a conflict between the guests. Originally, Zhang Hai was still thinking whether there would be some kind of melodramatic thing, but he didn't expect that the people in this hotel were quite neutral. After looking at the situation, they didn't come over to say anything melodramatic, nor did they stand up for this man. They just walked in front of this man and asked if he needed to call the police or an ambulance. Their meaning was obvious. They were not going to stand up for him and find trouble with Zhang Hai. Hearing the words of these security guards, the man's face turned purple. Zhang Hai and the others sat in the distance, but they couldn't help but laugh. This guy seems to be sick, and very sick. This disease is called the protagonist's disease. He always thinks that the world should revolve around him. As long as others are disrespectful to him, or have a trace of neutrality, he will jump out and say that he has suffered unfair treatment. Now, seeing that these security guards didn't stand up for him, he couldn't help but jump up and curse. But he only moved his mouth, he didn't dare to do anything, and if he called the police wouldn't care. Just the fact that he harassed the other party first, Per Walton could sue him, and it was uncertain who would win at that time. He had to admit that the United States had a strong sense of law. Even if he had called the police, nothing would have happened. This guy just said a few harsh words and left. Looking at his back, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh, There are really a lot of crazy dogs. Young man, you may have to be careful. At this time, after the people at the next table finished eating, a yellow man in his 40s walked to Zhang Hai's table and looked at Zhang Hai in a friendly manner. Oh, hello. What should I be careful of? Hearing this man's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but immediately reply, then asked him. The person you just kicked out is called Roland Schalader, the heir of the SSR company. His family has a high status in the Texas livestock industry. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, the middle-aged man said to Zhang Hai, at least he has to let Zhang Hai know who he offended. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also looked at Perwalton in confusion. He has never heard of the SSR company. Texas Animal Husbandry Company. We have dealt with this company before. It is indeed one of the largest companies in Texas. The first S stands for State of Texas, and the last SR stands for stock farming. Its market value is estimated to be around $2 billion. Looking at Zhang Hai's eyes, Perwalton's brain flashed, and he already found the company's situation. Chapter 687. More than 2 billion? Hearing Perwalton's words, Zhang Hai touched his chin and smiled. Animal husbandry companies worth more than 2 billion yuan. In fact, on a global scale, it was definitely not a small company. This was talking about the market value, not the total value. If he wants to acquire it, the price will inevitably be higher, about 3 billion. In the world, there were only a few companies in animal husbandry that could reach millions of dollars. Among them, the well-deserved giant in the United States was the Cargill Group. Other than that, there was no existence that Zhang Hai couldn't move. A small company with a market value of more than 2 billion can't even compare to Zhang Hai. What can Zhang Hai be afraid of them? Thank you very much, I will take care of his affairs. Since he is not afraid in his heart, he is in the medical team. Only by knowing the enemy and yourself can you win 100 battles. Zhang Hai is not a person who takes advantage of others. Since this person helped him, Zhang Hai still has to thank him. You're welcome. I see your skin color. You are Asian, right? Looking at Zhang Hai, the middle-aged man also smiled and said to him, well, yes, I am from Xueqi. Hearing this man's words, Zhang Hai answered the question. In fact, he was also a little curious. I feel like you are from Xueqi. My name is Lu Leking, and I am also from Xueqi. Now I run a ranch in Texas. This is my wife, Xueqi Lu, and this is my son, Lu Rongshuan. Hearing that Zhang Hai is also from Xueqi, the middle-aged man here couldn't help but smile. Then he introduced the two people behind him, a very typical white woman, about the same age as Lu Leking. There is also a mixed-race boy who looks to be in his teens. At this time, he is looking at Zhang Hai timidly. Hello, brother. Did you settle down here? After greeting them, Zhang Hai couldn't help but look at Lu Leking. Yeah, it's not easy to make a living in China. I studied here when I was in university. After I graduated, I considered going back to China to work, but the working environment in China wasn't very good. So I took the 200,000 that my dad was going to give me to find a job and came to the place where I studied. I bought a piece of land and started working as a farmer. How should I put it? At least it's more comfortable than working in China. Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Lu Leking couldn't help but smile. But don't look at how happy he is. But Zhang Hai knew that 200,000 renminbi from 10 years ago was still worth a lot of money. At that time, he might not be able to buy a house in Beijing, but he could at least buy a good house in Bing City. He could even use 200,000 renminbi to invest overseas. He had to admit that Lu Leking was daring. Brother, you are really bold. Hearing this, Zhang Hai couldn't help but give him a thumbs up. Haha, it's not like what you said. Actually, the reason why I came here is because I studied here when I was in university, so I am not unfamiliar with this place. But little brother, are you also participating in the beef cattle exhibition? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Lu Leking couldn't help but smile. Although he didn't think that he was great, being able to gain recognition was a good feeling. Yes, I am also a farmer, but my home is in Winthrop. If you have time, you can come to my place to play. My place is near the sea. Listening to Lu Leking's words, Zhang Hai also said with a smile. Okay, when I have time. Hearing Zhang Hai's invitation, Lu Leking couldn't help but smile and said. In fact, these words were almost the same as not saying anything. In China, when I have time, I will wait for the next time, and I will wait for a while. These words were basically excuses. When I have time. When will I have time? Wait for the next time. When will the next time be? So when they say this, they are just being polite, but it is different in the United States. They will take it seriously. So after hearing the words of his father and Zhang Hai, Lu Leking didn't have any thoughts, but his wife and son's eyes lit up. To them, being able to go out and play was a very good thing. After saying goodbye to Lu Leking's family, Zhang Hai also went back to prepare. They were going to the cowshed to take a look. Although the cows were sent to the cowshed last night, Zhang Hai didn't look at the environment there carefully. Now that it is dawn, everyone can't sleep during the day, so naturally, they have to go and take a look. As for Prewalton, she left first. Because she also has her own things to do. As the manager of Sam's Club, she not only has to give advice to Zhang Hai, but also her own business. She also had to think about her own store. Therefore, since she came to the National Beef Cattle Exhibition, not only did she have to help the Soaring Dragon Manor make a name for herself, but she also had to choose a channel to sell the meat. After all, Zhang Hai's manor only produced 10,000 cows a year. A cow weighs more than 400 kilograms of beef. That's more than 8 million pounds of beef. That's all. If it was distributed to the entire United States, it wouldn't even be enough for everyone in the United States to eat. Of course, this is just a saying. Zhang Hai's beef is not for ordinary people to eat. But for those rich people, 365 days a year wasn't enough. Therefore, Sam's Club still needed to purchase some other types of beef. Zhang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor had high-end beef, but they also needed some mid-range beef. As for the low-end beef, they didn't need it. They could directly go to Walmart to buy it. Because of her work, she had to go to the local area to recruit her staff, and then come to Zhang Hai's place in the evening. Now Prewalton may have been holding back for too long. It is time for her to taste. She is extremely infatuated with Zhang Hai. Cheryl Lee is also quite infatuated with Zhang Hai, not to mention Prewalton. After separating from the two women, Zhang Hai also drove the car and took Connerson Peters to the cowshed. After all, there are only 3 cowboys this time, and they are divided into 3 shifts. In that case, the people will be exhausted, so Zhang Hai must come to replace them. When he arrived here, Robbins Garcia is standing in front of their 3 cows busy. Seeing Zhang Hai come over, he can't help but smile and wave, indicating his position. Zhang Hai walked over while looking at the nearby situation. He has to admit that this National Animal Husbandry exhibition is quite good. The cowshed was completely separated from each other. It should be that when the cowshed was built, they had already considered the number of cattle each family had. Some families came here to discuss business, so they had more cattle. Because of this, their location was more remote and occupied a larger area. Some came to win awards, such as Zhang Hai. Their cows are relatively small, but they are very good. The cowshed they occupy is relatively small, but the facilities are better. For example, the shed where Zhang Hai is at this time is about 3 meters high. The whole roof is made of colored steel, the ground is made of cement, and the surrounding is also made of reinforced concrete. It is windproof and breathable. There is also a special sewage channel, feed trough, and so on. It can be said that it has everything. There is even an air conditioner in the cowshed to prevent the temperature here from being too high. On the other side of the cowshed, there is a single lounge. People can rest here at night. Zhang Hai walked in and took a look. The lounge is not big, about 3 or 4 square meters. In addition to a single bed, there is only a table and a few chairs. But even so, it is quite good. At least there is a place to rest. When Zhang Hai came, Robbins Garcia was there brushing the cows. Cows are not like horses, so they don't need to be brushed all day. Horses will have problems if they are not brushed for a few days, but cows are not brushed under normal circumstances. Zhang Hai's manor is the same. However, these cows are here to participate in the competition. Brushing their hair will make them more beautiful. At least in terms of appearance, it will add some points. Looking at Zhang Hai walking around, Robbins Garcia can't help but smile and say, "Hey boss, you're here." "Well, I'm here. The environment here is not bad. It's much better than the New York Beef Show." Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Zhang Hai also said to him. To be honest, he quite likes the environment here. Yeah, after all, this is Texas, a paradise for cowboys. Haha, when I was young I also came here to explore. I have to admit that with my skills, in Winthrop, no Boston, or even Massachusetts, I really don't respect anyone except Burke. But here, my level is only slightly better than a beginner. Shaking his head, Robbins Garcia said with some emotion. Texas and Montana, a paradise for cowboys, is not a joke. Purely in terms of skills, the strength of the people in these two places is indeed terrifying. Even Robbins Garcia has to admit defeat. According to him, in Texas, there are at least 8,000 if not 10,000 cowboys of his level. They dare not show off here. However, Zhang Hai didn't intend to hire any cowboys here. This was because the cowboys in Texas were notorious for their bad tempers. Perhaps it was because they were located on the border, but their customs were quite tough. If the Russians were a fighting nation, then the Texans were also half a fighting nation. It is very common to fight over a disagreement here. They are very xenophobic and are unwilling to leave their hometown, even if their hometown is very poor. Under such circumstances, if Zhang Hai wants to recruit people, those with real skills will not come. Moreover, Zhang Hai was quite confident in Robbins Garcia. This skill was enough for him. Zhang Hai was more interested in him, not because of his cowboy skills, but because of his management ability, which was a rare ability. After visiting the cowshed here, Zhang Hai also stayed here and chatted with Robbins Garcia. At night, Zhang Hai has to deal with Prawalton and Cheryl. In addition, he is the boss. He will not come at night, but he is still willing to come and take a look during the day. If Robbins Garcia wants to sleep, he can go back to sleep. If he wants to walk around, he can also walk around. 4 people watching is better than 1 person here. Robbins Garcia also knows Zhang Hai's thoughts. Although he and Zhang Hai have an employer-employee relationship, the two of them have a good private relationship. Therefore, they had a lot of topics to talk about. While talking, Zhang Hai also talked about Du Feimin's manner. But after listening to Zhang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia frowned. In fact, using a helicopter to herd cattle is not good news. Because the sound of the helicopter is too loud, the cattle will be frightened after hearing it. Even if they are used to it, the noise will have some effect on them. They won't get fat. Without fat, there will be no marble veins. Just relying on our grass. Looking at Zhang Hai, Robbins Garcia said with some worry. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai was also stunned. He only saw the spectacular scene there, but he really didn't think about this problem. The helicopter is indeed very loud. He felt a little uncomfortable listening to it, let alone those cows. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai can't help but want to call Du Feimin. His first boat of grass has been transported. If the helicopter doesn't produce marble-veined beef, then Zhang Hai will lose more than he gains. It's better to call and inform him. TCH, you really don't know how to pretend to know. But just as he was about to call, a voice suddenly came from the opposite side of the cowshed. Zhang Hai and the others looked at the source of the voice and saw a few cowboys standing at the door of the opposite cowshed at this time. The voice came from one of them. Seeing Zhang Hai and the others looking over, the cowboy couldn't help but curl his lips in disdain. Boy, what did you say? Robbins Garcia's face was a little embarrassed when he was called a pretender. He has been herding cattle for decades, and now someone said that he is pretending to know? How can this be? Robbins Garcia picked up his pipe and knocked it gently. Robbins Garcia looked at the people in front of him and said, Cowboys are never afraid of trouble, even if the other party has more people than them. Old man, I said you are pretending to know. The cowboy here is also a calf who is not afraid of tigers, so he directly retorted. Okay, Dundee, don't bother with the layman. Hearing his words, the cowboys around him also said with a smile. What do you mean? Pretending to know when you don't know? Then tell me, what did I say wrong? Otherwise, this matter won't end here. Looking at the young cowboys in front of him, Robbins Garcia squinted his eyes and said with a stern face. For him, face is very important, especially in front of Zhang Hai. He can't bear it. Robbins Garcia stood up and said to the people in front of him. Let's go. Robbins Garcia said sternly. Chapter 688. What can you do if you're not done? Foreigner. This is Texas. What can you do? Looking at Robbins Garcia with disdain, the man said proudly. He had to admit that the people here were really despicable. In fact, racial discrimination aside, they had an inexplicable sense of pride for their hometown, especially these cowboys. In fact, being proud of one's hometown was quite a good thing, but there was no need to be so proud. Anyway, Zhang Hai couldn't stand it at all. Like I said, Texans only know how to move their mouths. Looking at these people, Zhang Hai also stood up, patted Robbins Garcia's shoulder, and said to him. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the faces of the cowboys on the opposite side changed. Okay, I'll tell you and let you be convinced. After thinking for a while, the man just now couldn't help but walk out and look at Zhang Hai and Robbins Garcia with an arrogant face. They also knew that they couldn't fight here, otherwise, they would be disqualified. Since they couldn't fight, they would directly show their strength and let these laymen know what they were capable of. The place you said used a helicopter to herd cows is a plain, right? There isn't much grass, but it's very open and quite hot. Looking at Zhang Hai, the young cowboy couldn't help but say. Hearing his words, although Zhang Hai was a little disdainful of him, he also recalled. Indeed, Du Feimin's ranch was the same as what he said. It was a plain after all. It was transformed from an oasis, so there were grasslands, but not a lot of them. After a few years, it would be much better. The area was also very large, and in the desert, it was naturally quite hot. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai nodded. He didn't say these things just now. It seemed that the cowboy in front of him really had some skills. These are the necessary conditions for using a helicopter to herd cows. Because it's very open, the sound of the helicopter can't be reflected, so the sound isn't as loud as imagined. In addition, people who generally have the financial resources to use helicopters to herd cows will generally install some sound-absorbing steel around their ranch. These steel will absorb the sound and transmit it underground, so the sound of the helicopter won't be particularly loud. At most, it's a dozen decibels louder than a car grazing. The cows can completely withstand it. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, the cowboy couldn't help but talk to Zhang Hai. Now that he heard his words, Zhang Hai compared them. It seemed that the sound of several helicopters on Du Feimin's ranch was not much different from the sound of the helicopter on his ranch. Of course, people would feel uncomfortable listening to it. Seeing Zhang Hai's reminiscing look, the man smiled disdainfully and then continued. The most important thing about using helicopters to herd cattle is that it's fast. Because the pasture is too big, after the cattle are released, they will look for food everywhere. If they keep running around like this, the pasture is too big, and the cattle will easily get lost and die of thirst and anxiety. Using helicopters to herd cattle can gather the cattle at any time, and when they feel that they are about to drink water, they can drive them to the water source. This centralized management is convenient and saves a lot of trouble. The most important thing is that using helicopters to herd cattle is very easy. 5 helicopters can herd 1 million cattle, and this only requires a dozen or so flying cowboys. If they were replaced with ordinary cowboys, at least a few hundred people would be needed, or even 1,000 people would be needed. This is a huge expense. Hearing this person's words, Zhang Hai and Robbins Garcia couldn't help but look at each other. Zhang Hai definitely didn't understand, but he felt that this person's words were very powerful. On the other hand, Robbins Garcia thought about it carefully and felt that what this person said was actually right. After all, he knew a lot more. Do you understand? Layman. Looking at Zhang Hai and Robbins Garcia's contemplative look, the cowboy laughed disdainfully. Young man, you're right, but you haven't considered the prerequisite. That is, the cows we want to raise have marbled patterns. Like what I said earlier, no matter how soft the sound is, the cows will still be frightened. Also, when the cows are moving too fast, the fat content in their bodies will decrease and become muscles. How do you solve this? Looking at the cowboy's disdainful smile, Robbins Garcia picked up his cigarette again, and said to him while filling it with tobacco. TSK, you guys really can't be that amateurish, right? Marbled beef needs to be raised carefully. As you said, driving helicopters to raise millions of cows, this is mass farming. You want to raise marbled beef? Uncle, you must be dreaming. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, the young man couldn't help but sneer, then said with a look of disdain. The whole world knew how terrifying the price of beef was when it was expensive. For example, Japanese Wagyu was really expensive to the point of making people's hair stand on end. As for the method of breeding and even the breed of cattle, some capable people could get it. But why were these cattle not famous outside of Japan? The main problem was the method of breeding. Everyone knew how to raise a Wagyu into a superb breed. Drinking red wine and massaging, these things were known to all. But almost no one knew how to do this. Those top-notch Wagyu were all products raised with such precision. How much did the labor cost now? If they did this, although the beef was expensive, a single cow really couldn't make much money. It might not even be as profitable as raising cattle in batches. Otherwise, no one was stupid. Since they knew how to raise cattle to make money, why didn't they do it? Wasn't it because it wasn't worth it at all? Now that he heard Zhang Hai and the others say that they wanted to raise marbled beef, the young man couldn't help but speak disdainfully. It's obvious that this kind of kid hasn't seen the world. Let's go, what's there to talk about with them? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai said to Robbins Garcia. This was considered as revenge for his mockery just now. But it was obvious that some people had to endure if they were insulting you, but if they were insulting them, then they couldn't. When the young cowboy heard Zhang Hai's words, he was instantly ignited and directly jumped up. You two are amateurs. How dare you say that I haven't seen the world? I've been playing on the ranch since I was 6 years old. It's been 18 years now. Last year, I just won the Texas Cowboy competition. You say that I haven't seen the world? The young man pointed at Zhang Hai and the others and said loudly. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai was really stunned. This guy really had some background. The first place of the Texas Cowboy competition was very valuable, but unfortunately, his personality was not very likable. 6 years old, 18 years old, that is to say, you are now 24 years old. Didn't your father teach you how to talk to people older than you? Looking at the person in front of him, Zhang Hai chuckled, then looked at the cowboy in front of him and said word by word. You bastard, what are you talking about? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the cowboy's eyes narrowed and he looked at Zhang Hai with a vicious face and said, I'll repeat it again. I said that you have no upbringing. Looking at the young cowboy, Zhang Hai also took a step forward and said condescendingly, You yellow monkey. I think you are looking for death. Listening to Zhang Hai's words, the young man couldn't help but shout loudly. You white pig, let's see who is looking for death. Hearing these obviously racist words, Zhang Hai's face darkened. It was useless to talk to these people. He dared to scold him, so Zhang Hai naturally had to scold him back. At the same time, he clenched his fists. F***CK. This is Texas. But this white pig ignited the fire of war. These cowboys opposite were all white. Without saying anything, they directly rushed out of the cowshed, clenched their fists, and wanted to fight with Zhang Hai. Now they didn't care about the rules here. They just wanted to teach Zhang Hai a lesson. But unfortunately, before they had time to get close, Knerson Peters had already rushed up from behind. Although he was also white, he didn't mind Zhang Hai's words. Looking at the fiercest cowboy, he didn't say anything and punched him. With a loud bang, the man was instantly knocked to the ground by Knerson Peters. When the people behind saw this scene, they couldn't help but be stunned and then looked at Knerson Peters in horror. This man was not small, about 1.85 meters tall. Because he often herded, his body was also a pile of muscles, but at this time, he was knocked down by Knerson Peters with one punch, which made them quickly calm down. What are you doing? At this time, a group of security guards in uniforms ran over from a distance. There were surveillance cameras in the vicinity. If anything happened here, the people in the distance would know. At first, they thought it was just a normal quarrel, but they didn't expect it to be a fight. Seeing the security guards coming over, these people became excited again. They took a step forward and shouted, but no one dared to rush forward again. What's going on? After separating the two sides, a security guard looked at the people on both sides with a headache and asked. These security guards were not the police. They were only here to maintain order. They did not care about anything. Looking at the scene in front of them, they knew without a doubt that it had something to do with the local culture in Texas. Racial discrimination in Texas was quite serious. Even if it was explicitly stated that such behavior was not allowed, there were still many people who would do so. As the saying goes, the law cannot punish the majority. If you want to live peacefully here, people of color more or less have to learn how to compromise. But outsiders, like Zhang Hai and the others, were different. They only came here for a short period of time, so no one would spoil them. Now looking at the situation, the security guard guessed that the cowboys here should be bullying strangers again. But it doesn't mean that he will care. He just wants to make sure that there is no conflict between the two sides. These 3 foreigners actually dared to call us white-skinned pigs. Looking at the security guard captain's words, the cowboys here couldn't help but shout with some excitement. In Texas, no one dared to say that to them. Hearing the words of the cowboy, the security guard captain also looked at Zhang Hai with some surprise. Then what do you mean by yellow-skinned monkeys? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai snorted coldly and said slowly. As soon as he heard Zhang Hai's words, the security guard captain's heart skipped a beat, just as he thought. Okay, I can't do anything about this. What do you think? Do you want to call the police? Patting his forehead, the security guard captain said helplessly. It's better for him not to get involved in this matter. Call the police? As soon as they heard these 2 words, Zhang Hai and the cowboys all quieted down. The cowboys were quiet because they didn't want to call the police. Moreover, they were the ones who started the trouble first. There are surveillance cameras here. If they call the police, they won't be in a good position. As for the insults, no one here recorded it, so who knows who said it. As for Zhang Hai, if someone dared to scold him in Winthrop, they would definitely call the police. But this was Texas, and the most important thing was that Zhang Hai came here to participate in the competition. If he called the police and delayed the competition, then the gains would not make up for the losses. But this was Texas, and Zhang Hai came here to participate in the competition. So he glanced at the other party, waved his hand hatefully, and went straight into his cowshed. The cowboys on the opposite side were not going to call the police. Seeing that Zhang Hai left first, they also shouted a few words, but then they all returned to the cowshed. Seeing this scene, the security guard captain was also happy and relaxed. He turned around and left, but these cowboys looked at Zhang Hai and the others. They couldn't help but feel angry. They were used to being tyrannical here. Now that they suddenly met someone who dared to shout at them, they couldn't stand it. We can't just take this lying down. At this time, the cowboy who was beaten first, who had just recovered, rubbed his blue cheeks and said bitterly. This is a big loss. He won't easily swallow it. Then what do you think we should do? There are surveillance cameras here. Looking at the cowboy in front of him, the people around him also asked in a low voice. To be honest, they can't take this lying down. This is their home ground. How can they be bullied like this? Isn't this taking a dump on their heads? Aren't these guys here to participate in the competition? There are many ways to deal with them. Now let's contact the other cowboys. We must let these guys go home empty-handed. Rubbing his face, the cowboy here said with a face full of hatred. Hearing his words, the other cowboys also moved. They joined forces to resist Zhang Hai and the others. In their eyes, there was nothing wrong with this. As for Zhang Hai, naturally, he doesn't care. His goal from the beginning was not to fight with these cowboys. His vision is much bigger. Chapter 689. I heard that you had a grudge with the cowboys here during the day? Perwalton raised his head and looked at Zhang Hai in front of him. He had to admit that doing that kind of thing was addictive. They were busy during the day. When they returned to the hotel at night, Perwalton and Cheryl Lee didn't even have the leisure to eat. Instead, they directly pulled Zhang Hai into the room. When they stopped, Zhang Hai had to sit up helplessly and prepare to order some food. He hadn't eaten yet. Yeah, I had some conflicts with them. I told you, I hate the people here. Zhang Hai spread his hands and said to Perwalton with some speechlessness. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Perwalton couldn't help but laugh. As a person of color, it was indeed not easy to make a living in Texas. According to the statistics of the United States, pure whites accounted for 52.4% of the population here. This was calculated more than 10 years ago. Now, it would only be higher than this, not lower than this. The second was Mexican. After all, this place was occupied by Mexico before. Blacks, who accounted for a large proportion of the population in the United States, only accounted for 11.5% here. Germans accounted for 9%, and Irish accounted for 2%. The unemployment rate of people of color here was as high as 90%. 3% of people of color couldn't live here for a lifetime. They would always leave for one reason or another. It could be said that this was a paradise for white people. Even compared to Boston, the birthplace of racial discrimination, this place was worse. There was no other way. The people here were tough, and a large proportion of them were cowboys. These people were stubborn as hell. He was just like that. You could do whatever you wanted, and they were very united. Therefore, whether it was the state government or the United States government, there was nothing they could do about these people. Even though there were clear rules, they still scolded and scolded as they should. Anyway, they didn't have any money to pay. If anyone dared to arrest them, a group of cowboys would surround the police station and cause trouble. This sentence was not wrong at all in this case. As a businessman, you have to learn to hide your emotions so that others can't see your happiness and anger. Only then can you gain the upper hand at the discussion table. You're still too emotional now. Walton looked at the menu in Zhang Hai's hand and smiled. He didn't care that a certain part of his body was squeezed out of shape by Zhang Hai's chest. Well, it seems that I'm not a qualified businessman. Zhang Hai shrugged and said indifferently. These cowboys are very united. They can't do anything to you now, but after the exhibition starts the day after tomorrow, I don't know. You have to be prepared for them to target you. Looking at Zhang Hai, Walton said seriously. Although she didn't know what these people would do, offending these bastards was indeed not a good thing. Well, this is a problem. Okay, I'll pay attention to it. Hearing Walton's words, Zhang Hai froze for a moment. But in his view, these people may only send people to find fault with him, that's all. If someone dares to come over and show off, then Zhang Hai doesn't mind letting them know why the flowers are so red. Zhang Hai's temper is not very good. I want to eat this. Cheryl, what do you want to eat? After finishing the business, Walton pointed at the menu and said. At the same time, she kicked Cheryl Lee in Zhang Hai's arms and asked her. I'm a little sleepy. I don't really want to eat. I'll just eat something. Cheryl Lee opened her eyes in a daze and said with a smile. Her physical fitness was far worse than Walton's. Don't forget, when they were in New York, this girl was abnormally crazy. Zhang Hai was afraid of hurting her body, so he injected a lot of aura into her. Because of this, her current physical fitness was quite good. After fighting with Zhang Hai, she would be able to recover in about 8 to 10 minutes. But for ordinary people like Cheryl Lee, they wouldn't be able to get out of bed easily in less than half an hour. You still have to eat something. What do you want to eat? Taking away Walton's little foot, Zhang Hai put his hand on Cheryl Lee's back, patted it gently, and said to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee forced herself to be alert. Anything is fine, but I want you to feed me. Feed me mouth to mouth. Looking at Zhang Hai, Cheryl Lee said with a smile. You little slut. Listening to Cheryl Lee's request, Walton couldn't help but roll her eyes. This girl is really shameless. Zhang Hai listened to her and agreed with a smile. Then she happily ordered some spaghetti. After dinner was served, the three of them gathered together and had a delicious meal. However, Walton ate by herself, while Cheryl Lee sat naked on Zhang Hai's lap and let Zhang Hai feed her. Looking at the scene in front of her, Walton couldn't help but curl her lips. After eating, she directly threw Cheryl Lee on the bed. It seemed that she was going to reinvigorate herself. The next 2 days could be said to be calm. It was not an exaggeration to use this word to describe it. The person who fancied Walton and wanted to harass her didn't appear. The cowboys were also temporarily honest. It seemed that they were holding back their evil intentions and were waiting for the start of the exhibition to find trouble with Zhang Hai. So in the past few days, Zhang Hai and the others paid special attention, but it was in vain. The other party didn't make any excessive moves. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the exhibition to begin. After all, it was a Texas livestock exhibition. Although the Americans didn't like gongs and drums, firecrackers, red flags, and a sea of people, it was still very lively and quite impressive. It was just that it lacked a lot of formalities. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Zhang Hai and the others brought their cows to their own exhibition hall. The layout of the exhibition hall was much better than that of the cowshed. Each cow lived in a separate compartment. The compartment was surrounded by iron fences, allowing the cows to graze freely. Meanwhile, people could observe the situation of the cows from all directions. This was also the standard of the judges for the first 3 days. After the cows were sent to the exhibition hall, Zhang Hai also received the details of the evaluation. The first 3 days were to evaluate the appearance of the cows, the size, the color of their hair, the brightness of their eyes, the tidiness of their teeth, whether there were any congenital defects, and so on. These were all things that had to be looked at. Each cow had its own independent interface. These judges would hide in the crowd and walk in to look at the cows. Then they would give the cows a score. The highest score was 10, and the lowest score was 0. There were also 8 options for scoring, which were similar to what was described above. Zhang Hai didn't look too carefully, but he knew that in terms of Angus cattle, his cows were worthy of being kings. Even if they were compared to other cows, he wouldn't be afraid. After looking at the situation, Zhang Hai didn't care about Robbins Garcia and the others who were very nervous around him. He slowly walked out of the exhibition hall. Zhang Hai had 1.2 million points of confidence in his beef cows. He didn't even have confidence in his cows. Walking out of the exhibition hall, Zhang Hai also looked at the people around him. He had to admit that the Texas Yak Show was much bigger than the one in New York. Although he didn't like the people here, the cows here were indeed the most abundant in the United States, no, even the world. It was also very good. According to the display above, the Texas Yak Show was divided into 2 areas, namely the animal husbandry area and the rodeo area. The rodeo area was much smaller than the animal husbandry area. Starting from the preliminary round, there were a total of 3 major events: equestrian, goat snatching, and bull riding. Equestrian was divided into equestrian taming and horsemanship. Horsemanship was to ride a horse through obstacles. It wasn't the kind of dressage, but the kind of competition that tested a cowboy's horsemanship. It was the same for goat snatching. Among a flock of sheep, who could find the target sheep the fastest? Of course, it wasn't based on the sheep's face, but on the sheep's body. But whoever rode the horse first and carried the sheep from the flock to the finish line would be the winner. The last one was bull riding. Zhang Hai had seen this before in the country's imperial court. It was just some simple protective gear, and then ride on a mad bull to see who could last the longest. This competition was also the most dangerous one. First, it was really dangerous to fall from the bull's back. Second, the mad bull might attack the rider who fell to the ground. Every year, people would be injured or even killed in this competition. But in the United States, especially in the cowboy circle, this competition was the most eye-catching. The 3 competitions were divided into 3 days. After 3 days, the 64 people with the best results would enter the finals and start competing again. Obviously, ordinary tourists preferred to see the cowboys. So early in the morning, the cowboy arena was already full of people. On the other hand, Zhang Hai's side was deserted, but no one was in a hurry. There was nothing to be anxious about, because the selection here wasn't like the cowboys who fought for their own glory. They were here to do business. The tourists went to see the people, but the businessmen came to see the cows. This was the real money. Compared to the New York Beef Show, the Animal Husbandry Show's exhibition hall was about 5 times bigger than the one in New York. The security was more decent, and there were more exhibition halls. There wasn't anything messy, and there was no voting for tourists. *T. The place here was bigger and more professional. At least in this respect, Zhang Hai had to admit that Texas was really good. Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way. But just as Zhang Hai was standing at the door, a slightly panicked voice suddenly came from the distance. Then, Zhang Hai turned his head and saw a stinky cart filled with cow dung running towards him quickly. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai subconsciously wanted to get out of the way, but the cart seemed to be targeting him and ran straight towards him. Who the F***CK? Zhang Hai's reaction was not slow, but the cart was faster. At the same time, Zhang Hai glanced around and found that the cowboys nearby were looking at him with smiles on their faces. Of course, there was also a trace of strong disdain. Seeing that the cart full of cow dung was about to hit Zhang Hai instantly jumped back and dodged the cart. The people behind the cart didn't think that Zhang Hai could actually dodge at such a fast speed. They were stunned for a moment. But this person was worthy of being called a ruthless person. Since he couldn't hit Zhang Hai, he directly did it. His hand tilted, and the cart full of cow dung fell directly towards Zhang Hai. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai immediately took a few steps back. But although he retreated beyond the safety line, the cart of cow dung was directly in front of his exhibition hall. In an instant, a stench came from under the cart, making the people who were originally walking on this road subconsciously retreat to the side. What do you mean by this? Looking at the cow dung in front of his door, Zhang Hai's eyes were about to spit fire. He thought about it and understood that this guy should be in cahoots with those cowboys. The reason why he did such a thing was that those cowboys made a move. What do you mean by I? What do you mean? You just want to watch my cart fall down? Didn't you say that hua xia is the help of etiquette? Why don't you want to touch the cart for me? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man couldn't help but put his hands on his waist and said with an angry face. Hearing his unreasonable words, Zhang Hai laughed. He had seen shameless people, but he had never seen such a shameless person. Why would he touch the dung cart for him? Help of etiquette? Is help of etiquette used for this? I'll help your uncle. Hurry up and get these things out of here. Looking at the man in front of him, Zhang Hai's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Oh, I won't do it. Hit me if you can. However, the man in front of him was really shameless. He looked straight at Zhang Hai and said. Hearing this man's annoying words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but clench his fists, but fortunately he held back. If he made the first move, he wasn't afraid of the police and money, but the exhibition hall would be destroyed. Boss, calm down. Call security. At this time, Robbins Garcia came out of the exhibition hall and looked at the angry Zhang Hai. He pulled Zhang Hai to the wind, then said something to Zhang Hai, then called Berkdahl. In fact, he didn't need to say anything. Berkdahl had already contacted the security guards. The quality of the security guards here was very good. Soon, a group of security guards rushed over, but when they arrived, they couldn't help but cover their noses and retreat far away. It should be known that cows were quite smelly. Cows especially liked to fart, and their poop was especially smelly. The smell was really pungent. Looking at the situation in front of them, they couldn't help but look at Zhang Hai and the man pushing the cart. What's the meaning of this? Chapter 690. Seryu. What's going on here? Looking at the pile of cow dung in front of him, the security guard looked at Zhang Hai and asked carefully. You're asking me? Go and ask that fellow who ordered him to dump the cow dung here. Hearing the security guard's words, Zhang Hai pointed to the man standing in the distance with an indifferent look and said to him, Barton, what's going on here? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the security guard here walked in front of the man and asked him. It can be seen that this cowboy named Barton should be an old man here, otherwise, it's impossible for the security guard to recognize him. It's nothing, I was just pushing cow dung, and I pulled my hand and accidentally fell over, that's all. Hearing the security guard's words, the cowboy named Barton didn't say anything bad about Zhang Hai. There are cameras everywhere here. If he wants to say more, he can directly change the camera. He will be even more passive, so instead of this, it's better for him to just say it. Then why don't you hurry up and clean up here? Hearing Barton admit it like this, the security guard didn't expect him to admit it so quickly. He thought that he would pester him for a while, but he didn't expect him to admit it so quickly. Since he admitted it, it's easy to deal with it. Whoever is responsible will deal with it. Oh, didn't you hear what I said just now? I pulled my hand, and now I can't use my hand, so I can't do anything about it. I'm going to the hospital, sorry. Barton shrugged and said to the security guard, then turned around and left. Stop, you poured this pile of cow dung in front of my door. Now you don't clean it up for me, and you still want to leave? Looking at this guy, Zhang Hai's face was really black. He really didn't think that these cowboys would really do such a disgusting thing. Yes, these guys are not looking for trouble with Zhang Hai, they are just disgusting him. And the most important thing is that by doing this, the judges hidden among the public will not come close to Zhang Hai's exhibition hall. No matter how good his cow dung is, no one will come to see it, so what's the use? Even if the judges endured the stench and came in, they wouldn't be able to withstand the stench. It was also impossible for them to take a closer look at his cow. If they were to casually give him a score and leave, The one who would suffer losses would be Zhang Hai. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai really wanted to go up and punch this guy, but he knew that he couldn't do it in broad daylight. I'm really sorry, but my hand is injured. You can't ask someone with an injured hand to work, right? This is the United States. We have to talk about human rights and freedom here. Barton looked at Zhang Hai. Although he apologized, there was a trace of disdain and pride on his face. He wanted to mess with Zhang Hai. He wanted to do it openly. Even if he was injured, who could do anything about it? You! Hearing Barton's words, Zhang Hai's eyes narrowed and he couldn't help but take a step forward. However, Barton smiled and retreated, leaving just like that. Boss, what do we do now? Do you want me to catch him and teach him a lesson? Seeing Barton leave and Zhang Hai can't do anything to him, Bell Lester couldn't help but frown. He walked to Zhang Hai's side and asked him. We can't just do it. What about Robbins now? Zhang Hai patted Bell's shoulder and looked at Robbins Garcia and said. He gave Zhang Hai a reassuring look and walked directly to the security guard who was still standing here. I want to see your manager. Tell him to come and see me. Robbins Garcia looked at the security guard in front of him and said calmly. You want to see our manager? What's the matter? When they heard that they wanted to see the manager, not only the domestic staff would be a little scared, but these security guards would also be a little scared. So they looked at Robbins Garcia and said, Look at our exhibition hall. I think you work here, so you should be familiar with it. We spent a total of $1.3 million to rent this exhibition hall for 7 days, $1.3 million. Now there is a pile of cow dung in front of our exhibition hall. I want to ask the manager here what's the meaning of this. Now I want to change the exhibition hall, or according to the contract, triple the compensation. Robbins Garcia looked at the security guard in front of him and said with a serious face. Hearing his words, the security guard here sweated all of a sudden. Perhaps for the exhibition, triple the compensation is not a lot, but this money is in the pockets of these people. How can they spit it out? If they have to pay $3.9 million, they definitely won't take the money, and it is very likely that they will vent their anger on the security guard. This is a mistake in our work. I don't think we should alarm the manager. As for this pile of cow dung, I'll take care of it. After thinking for a while, the security guard said hesitantly. People under the eaves had no choice but to lower their heads. Now, he was already cursing Barton in his heart. Of course, there was also Robbins Garcia. These damn foreigners, but he couldn't say that out loud. After hesitating for a while, the security guard looked at his subordinates, but when he looked at them, these security guards politely avoided his gaze. What a joke, they can smell the cow dung. Whoever wants to do it can do it. Anyway, they don't want to do it. They can't earn much money a day as security guards here. When the time comes, they will be smelly and disgusting. The loss outweighs the gain. Americans were extremely picky about their jobs. They would rather quit the job than suffer from it. Looking at the evasive gaze of his subordinates, the security guard here is really in trouble. Well, I'll leave it to you. After 10 minutes, if this pile of shit is still here, I'm going to find your manager. Hearing the security guard's words, Robbins Garcia said with a serious face. After speaking, he walked to Zhang Hai's side. Zhang Hai also gave him a thumbs up. Sometimes, having an elder at home is like having a treasure. Robbins Garcia should talk about this at this time. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, the security guard here couldn't help but sigh. He gritted his teeth. He signed a captain-level contract with this exhibition. He was not a temporary worker. It would be difficult for him to give up this job. So after hesitating for a while, he decided to do it. Then he borrowed a shovel from Zhang Hai and asked his subordinates to turn the cow dung cart over. Then he resisted the urge to vomit and shoveled the cow dung into the cart. When he was almost done, he covered his nose and went to the side to vomit. After that, he stubbornly pushed the cart of cow dung away. Although it took half an hour, the cow dung was finally dealt with, but the smell didn't dissipate so easily. Zhang Hai and the others deliberately pulled out a water pipe from the exhibition hall and washed the ground here. The smell was quite strong. It didn't disperse for a long time. There weren't many people in the beef exhibition hall, and most people would walk around when they came to Zhang Hai's exhibition hall. It was really too smelly. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai and the others sitting in the exhibition hall had ugly expressions. But what could they do? When he thought of Barton, Zhang Hai couldn't help but gnash his teeth in anger. He was sure that Barton did it on purpose. At this time, Barton had already returned from outside. There was a circle of gauze wrapped around his hand. Of course, it was just a disguise. He quietly walked into the exhibition hall. This exhibition hall was much bigger than the one Zhang Hai and the others were in. In the entire hall, there were almost 100 cows and more than a dozen different species. There were also a lot of people here. There were also 3 letters hanging outside the hall. SSR. Yes, this was one of the biggest livestock companies in Texas SSR. It was also the company that had a conflict with Zhang Hai. After the man named Barton came in, he went straight to the lounge next door. In this lounge, he saw the man flirting with a female employee, so he coughed lightly and knocked on the door. Hearing that someone was here, the female employee immediately stood up and tidied up her clothes. She then winked at Barton and left. Barton's gaze followed the woman as she left. Fortunately, the man noticed him. Ahem, how's it going? Looking at Barton, the person inside pretended to look through the information and said to him, "It's done. That Zhang Hai is really looking for trouble. Not only did he offend all the cowboys in Texas, he also offended you. If he didn't only participate in livestock shows, I would have already dealt with him. If he participates in a cowboy competition, I can guarantee that he won't have a complete ending." When he heard the man's words, Barton had a flattering expression on his face. Then he walked forward while talking. When the man heard Barton's words, he couldn't help but grin. This man was called Roland Shalater. He was the one who had a conflict with Zhang Hai. Originally, he was still thinking about how to deal with Zhang Hai. After all, he hadn't been thrown out in a long time. But it was impossible to do it openly. Because Zhang Hai wasn't a person who lacked money. If he did it openly, he would lose face. So he could only play dirty. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with Zhang Hai, he suddenly heard that Zhang Hai had offended all the cowboys in Texas. In fact, in Texas, if you offend a white cowboy, it was the same as offending all the cowboys in Texas. After all, the number of people of color was still too small, let alone a cowboy. And this morning, he also heard that these cowboys wanted to deal with Zhang Hai. He had to admit that these cowboys were too simple-minded. They thought about it for 2 days, and the only way they came up with was to block the exhibition hall. They just directly pulled some people out and blocked Zhang Hai's exhibition hall. It was like some gangsters in China asking for protection. They didn't beat you or scold you. They just sat at the door and didn't let others in. In their opinion, if they don't let the judges in, then Zhang Hai's *T won't get any points. Naturally, he won't get any awards, no matter how good his *T was. However, when Roland Shalater heard the news, he couldn't help but smile. These guys' brains were filled with muscles. In such a situation, wouldn't Zhang Hai inform the organizers? For the sake of their reputation, the organizers definitely wouldn't let these cowboys do that. They would just send security guards to drive these people away. At that time, if there was any conflict with the Americans' mentality, it was very likely that they would help build momentum for Zhang Hai's exhibition hall. If they wanted to ruin Zhang Hai's exhibition hall, they had to think of a special way. They had to make people hate his exhibition hall from the bottom of their hearts. They wouldn't be willing to go near it and spread rumors. The time was too short, and Zhang Hai was a foreigner, so the effect wouldn't be good. Then they had to be more direct and make people unable to go in. That's why this morning's scene happened. This Barton was a Texas cowboy and also a member of his company. What he did today was taught by Roland Shalater. He had to admit that this guy had some talent in acting. Zhang Hai hated him so much that his teeth itched. "Boss, we finished Zhang Hai today. What are we going to do tomorrow? Do we still have to get cow dung?" Seeing that Roland Shalater was very satisfied with his actions this time, Barton couldn't help but laugh. At the same time, he rubbed his hands and said to Roland Shalater with a serious face, "They wouldn't just take revenge once. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, until Zhang Hai got out of here, they would disgust him. Tomorrow it's still cow dung, but we'll add more ingredients in it." Roland Shalater couldn't help but laugh when he thought of Zhang Hai's expression when he saw the truck full of cow dung. The more exasperated Zhang Hai was, the happier he was. How's today? Soon, the sun set in the west and the exhibition gradually came to an end. After the tourists left first, the beef cattle and cowboys also returned to their places. After Zhang Hai's beef cattle rushed back to the nest, Robbins Garcia took the first shift. Burke Dollar came again in the second half of the night. After dawn, Zhang Hai and the others came again to take the cattle to the exhibition hall. After settling the cattle, Zhang Hai also returned to the hotel. As soon as he came back, he saw that Cheryl Lee was waiting for him in the room. Seeing that Zhang Hai was a little tired, Cheryl Lee came over and asked him, it's a little troublesome. Why is it only you? Where's Pra Walton? With a chuckle, Zhang Hai asked Cheryl Lee. Pra will come back a little later tonight. The staff of Sam's Club came over. She wants to invite them to dinner tonight. Knurson Peters is with her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee also explained with a smile. She's not here. I thought I could come back and ask her for her opinion. After throwing his coat on the sofa, Zhang Hai lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. Zhang Hai felt that this matter might not be over. Chapter 691. What's wrong? Can you tell me about it? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but raise her head with some doubts and said to Zhang Hai. Looking at her appearance, Zhang Hai thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, Actually, it's nothing. Didn't I offend the cowboys here a while ago? Originally, I had been guarding against them, so I asked Belle and the others to be careful. As a result, I was still tricked by them today. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words, Zhang Hai sat up and said slowly. Hearing that Zhang Hai was tricked, Cheryl Lee immediately came over and looked at Zhang Hai with some concern. It's nothing, I was just disgusted by them. Looking at her eyes, Zhang Hai smiled and patted her hand. No matter how lawless those people were, they didn't dare to directly find trouble with Zhang Hai. But today's behavior was really too disgusting. Then Zhang Hai told Cheryl Lee about what happened today. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee was stunned. They can be so shameless? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but say with some surprise. Yeah, it's quite shameless. She nodded. Even a shameless person like Zhang Hai said these people were boring. How shameless are these people? It really made Zhang Hai seem to be angered by both humans and gods. This matter is really not easy to deal with. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but rub her head and say, These people can't be beaten, and scolding them won't relieve her anger. Moreover, they threw cow dung today. Zhang Hai doesn't believe that they will stop tomorrow. Thinking of this, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but feel a little numb because she didn't know what to do. The two of them sat on the big bed of the hotel, staring at each other, but they really couldn't think of any solution. My name is MT, Iron Wall Body. At this moment, Zhang Hai's cell phone rang. Looking at the phone, Zhang Hai picked it up. The person who called is none other than AI Xueqi. They call each other every night and it's time now. Hello, Zhang Hai, have you eaten? A crisp voice came from the other side of the phone, followed by others' greetings. Not yet. Listening to AI Xueqi's words, Zhang Hai also smiled. Listening to their voices, Zhang Hai seemed to even lighten up. It's so late and you haven't eaten yet? Are you very busy? Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Feng Yunchen on the other side suddenly interjected. It's okay that I'm busy, but there are some things that are bothering me. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Hai said helplessly. He wasn't the type to only report good news. He would report good news and bad news. He was so annoyed today that he couldn't think of a solution by himself. Rather than that, he might as well talk to AI Xueqi and the others. Even if he couldn't think of a solution, he could treat it as a way to reduce his stress. Without AI Xueqi and the others asking, Zhang Hai talked about today's matter. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, the other side couldn't help but be quiet. How is it? It's very troublesome. Hearing the other side quiet down, Zhang Hai couldn't help but say with a headache. Is it very troublesome? It's okay. But at this moment, AI Xueqi suddenly said. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. Is it very simple? How do we break this situation? Listening to AI Xueqi's voice on the phone, Zhang Hai said with some eagerness. Actually, this matter is very simple. In my hometown, there are also such people, but they are not cowboys, they are hoodlums. But from what you said, they are almost the same as the cowboys there. These people eat, drink, have sex, gamble, and smoke every day. Many of them are addicted to flour and the like, squandering their family fortune, their bodies are ruined, and they are sick. But they still need money to do these things, so they will blackmail some rich people and throw dead mice, dead cats, and the like into the yard of these rich people. You can't hit them, but with their physical condition, one punch is enough to make them lie in bed for half a year, and then you have to take care of them for half a year. Listening to AI Xiaoxi's words, Zhang Hai frowned. If such a person was by his side, he really wanted to beat him to death. But if he dies with such a person, it's really not worth it. It's similar to the current situation, but it's not so bad. What's the solution? Listening to AI Xiaoxi's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but ask with some doubts. There are two ways to solve this. One is to directly find the local police. If you have a good relationship with them, find the police to arrest them. After you teach them a lesson inside, they won't come to provoke you when they come out. Of course, the premise is that you can't provoke them. The second is to confront them head-on. Didn't he pour cow dung on you here? Then you can dump cow dung on them too. Listening to AI Xiaoxi's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. Yes, if they dump cow dung on me, then I can dump cow dung on them too. Giving them a taste of their own medicine. But the prerequisite is that you have to know who the other party is. If it's really like what you said, your opponent is just a small cowboy. In fact, I think it's better to find someone to beat them up. If you're still angry, you can try Croton. At this time, Qi Jie's voice came from the phone, but there was a trace of strangeness in her words. Croton. Listening to Qi Jie's words, Zhang Hai was a little confused. Isn't this game for diarrhea? What do I do with this thing? You have to find those people who hurt you, and then you have to find a way to give them some Croton. Don't worry, this thing can't be detected in the United States. The medical system in the United States is very poor. They can't even detect food poisoning. At most, they can only prescribe some medicine to stop diarrhea, but you can make them feel good. Listening to Qi Jie's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but touch his chin. This is a good idea. But the most important thing now is that you have to know who is targeting you. This is also very important. Feeling that Zhang Hai listened, Qi Jie also said seriously on the phone. It was impossible to directly face the entire state. It was important to find the person who stood out. Okay, I got it. After Qi Jie and others studied it, Zhang Hai also had a rough idea. He has never been a very obedient person. He will make trouble for these people no matter how others make trouble for him. He has never been a kind person. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai did not stay at home. Instead, he went downstairs and drove to the cowshed. Less than half an hour after he left, Perwalton also came back. When she saw that Zhang Hai was not in the hotel, she was stunned, and after Cheryl Lee told her about Zhang Hai today, she couldn't help but laugh. Then Perwalton made a phone call, and a man with a slightly anxious tone was on the other side of the phone. Miss Walton, I don't know if Mr. Zhang would like to meet and talk about the cooperation? Before Perwalton could speak, the person on the other side of the phone said seriously. It could be heard that his words were extremely anxious. Zhang Hai doesn't know about the cooperation because he is out, but I can take you directly to the exhibition hall tomorrow to see him. You can also see his cow. What do you think, Mr. Sean? Listening to the anxious voice on the other side of the phone, Perwalton said with a smile. Of course, no problem. Hearing Perwalton's words, the man named Sean on the other side of the phone agreed. It's solved. After hanging up the phone, Perwalton looked at the puzzled Cheryl Lee and said with a smile. Cheryl Lee blinked. In fact, to be honest, she didn't understand how it was solved, but she believed in Perwalton. At this time, Zhang Hai didn't know that Perwalton had helped him solve this seemingly troublesome matter. He was still studying his own plan. Croton and the like. He could just buy it now. Zhang Hai knew that there was a sea merchant supermarket nearby. If there was a sea merchant supermarket, it meant that there was a Chinese settlement. If he wanted to buy some Croton there, it wouldn't be a very troublesome thing. As long as he didn't kill anyone, it would be a small matter. If he wanted to find out who was dealing with him, the person named Barton was very important. But if he wanted to find out where he was, he would have to use other people. After all, he was too eye-catching. Robbins Garcia was also at the scene of the conflict that day, so it was inconvenient for him to show up. Burke Dollar was naturally more boring and not suitable for inquiring about things. Belle Lester was a very good candidate.
Young, frivolous, and because he had lived in the Triangle State, his spoken English was very good.
He was indeed the best candidate to find someone. After arriving at the cowshed, Zhang Hai talked to Belle Lester. Belle Lester immediately left the cowshed. After changing his clothes, he inquired about a Texas cowboy bar and sneaked in. In Texas, cowboys were one of the symbols here. Naturally, the cowboy bar here was also quite popular. Of course, he couldn't go in wrong because in the United States, sometimes cowboys also represented another culture. In the past, the Chinese director Ong Lee once made a movie that caused a sensation in Hollywood. It was called Brokeback Mountain. The protagonists in the movie were two cowboys, and then they cough. In the words of a song, the general idea was gay friends in the wind and rain. But in the United States, cowboy bars and sailor bars were sometimes bars that engaged in that kind of special relationship. Belle was very straight, straighter than steel, so he must go to a normal bar. Fortunately, he was also a cowboy, so he still knew how to distinguish. After finding the bar, he paid the entrance fee. Of course, it was paid by Zhang Hai. He walked into the bar. He sat down at the bar and ordered a glass of expensive wine. Then, he listened to the music as he drank. As soon as he walked in, he attracted a lot of attention. Of course, most of them were women. Belle was quite eye-catching in general. He was fair and clean. Because he had a good figure, he especially liked to wear a small shirt that could show off his muscles unless it was winter. There was a Special Forces identity tag hanging around his neck. Years of military life made him like to keep a very unique buzz cut. When he stayed in places like bars and nightclubs, it was indeed quite attractive. A wild, handsome white guy who used to be a soldier was enough to make those women go crazy. Looking at those women who were throwing flirtatious glances at him, if it was a normal day, Belle would have used his flirting skills. But today, he had business to do. After drinking a glass of wine, he ordered another one and then looked at the bartender. "Hey man, your music here is really good," Belle said while shaking his head slowly. "Of course, our music, wine and beautiful women here are the best in San Antonio." Hearing Belle's praise, the bartender here also said with excitement. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at a beautiful woman on the dance floor in the distance. Hearing his words, Belle also glanced back. He remembered that this beautiful woman just gestured to him, so he chuckled. This guy is about to take the bait. Music and wine. I've tasted it. Beautiful woman. I'm going to try it. Taking out a Franklin and stuffing it into the jar next to him, Belle finished speaking and walked into the crowd. Not long after, he returned to the bar with a beautiful woman in each arm, then winked at the bartender. But the bartender's face was a little ugly, because one of the beautiful women in Belle's arms at this time was his goddess. Seeing his gaze, Belle was more sure that he did the right thing. "Hey, beautiful women, I saw a scene when I was at the exhibition today. It was so interesting. A guy hurt his hand and then threw cow dung everywhere. Cow dung, haha." After a few simple greetings, and after ordering wine, Belle laughed and told what happened today as a joke to the two girls, and the girls were very happy to hear it. They didn't really come to listen to jokes. Naturally, they will like to listen to whatever Belle says. They only care about Belle and the Franklin in his pocket. But this scene, in the eyes of the bartender opposite, was burning with jealousy. Hurt his hand? Hey bro, you probably don't know the details. Just now, he endured for a long time and didn't interrupt. Now that he finally had a chance to speak, the bartender said slowly while wiping the wine glass. "Oh, is there any secret in this?" Hearing the bartender's words, Belle's eyes narrowed and he pretended not to care. "Of course, the person who turned the car over is called Willie Barton. He is right there. Do you think he hurt his hand?" When the bartender heard Belle's words, he smiled proudly and pointed to the guy who was dancing hard on the dance floor. "You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.